Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing, at which we're going to hear, first of all, from Mr. Myatt and then from some other firefighters. Mr. Myatt.
Mr. Chairman, good morning.
Before I just let Mr. Myatt come in, I think so.
Well, I was going to ask the witness to stay out, but it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter?
No.
No, you come in, Mr. Myatt. Good morning. I think Mr. Myatt wants to say one or two things before you resume your evidence, all right?
Yes. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, what I wanted to say arises out of some submissions made by Mr. Weatherby yesterday about disclosure of documents by the inquiry. And I only say this in light of some of the things that have been reported about those submissions in the press yesterday. I just want to make one thing crystal clear. It is not, and has never been, the approach of this inquiry to keep any relevant documents from anybody. The process in relation to disclosure of documents, in relation to which the figure of 378,000 documents has been given, relates almost exclusively to the Phase 2 documents, which are still in the process of review for relevance, review for deduplication, and then has to go through what may or may not be a complicated redactions process before they are ready to be disclosed to core participants. That process is ongoing. We will update the public and the families and all core participants as soon as we can with the precise figures as to where we've got to. But I would reject utterly the suggestion that the percentage of 4 or 5%, such as was bandied about yesterday, of disclosure represents anything like the total of documents which will be disclosed to the core participants in due course. So, with your permission, Mr. Chairman, what I propose to do at a convenient point in the near future is to provide a short update as to disclosure, including Phase 2 disclosure, so that nobody is in the dark.
For those who may not be fully in the picture, can you give us any information about the extent of disclosure in relation to the documents that are relevant to Phase 1?
So far as I know, almost all of those have been disclosed, and so far as they haven't been disclosed, this is because they're still being received from the LFB and reviewed by the police and coming to us after that process pursuant to the MOU. But as matters stand, the process is ongoing in relation to matters that are coming only from the LFB, I think on a fairly minor basis. There aren't very many, I don't believe, but we can check. And so far as there are ongoing statements and exhibits coming to us from the police, that is because they are only being generated by the police and given to us as they come.
Good. All right, thank you very much.
But as I say, Mr. Chairman, I will update the inquiry as soon as I can with the precise position.
Thank you.
Mr. Myatt, thank you very much for your patience. Now, can I go back to where we were yesterday? Can I take you, please, to page 10 of your page 11 of your witness statement, and I'll ask you please to go to the bottom of the page, and you say there, when I found Mr. Welch, he was on the second floor mezzanine area. He had the actual bridgehead and the BA entry controls set up on the 4th or 5th floor, but I didn't need to go up there. Can I just ask you, what was Group Manager Welch doing when you encountered him there?
At that particular moment, I think he was in the process of assessing whether it needed to be moved, the bridgehead, in amongst virtual mayhem of a million duties and a million things that he needed to consider. So there were lots and lots of firefighters arriving. There were people coming down the stairs seeking advice from him. He was having to update the command unit with progress. The list of things that he had to do then at that particular moment were vast, amongst assessing whether the bridgehead was safe enough to continue where it was. Obviously, our kind of procedures suggest that if it's not a breathable atmosphere, we should move the bridgehead, and I think that's what he was in the process of doing. There were 5 or 6 people around him seeking information and asking questions on a variety of things that were going on at that moment.
Right. Did you notice who was actually briefing BA crews as to which floors they were to be deployed to?
I think that was being done at that particular time on a different floor, on the fourth or fifth floor.
Right.
My actions were limited to when you get to the top of the lobby where the mezzanine floors were. There was a small staircase that led up to the stairwell that goes throughout the building. So most of my work was limited to there at the early stage.
Right.
I went up to the sixth floor, I think, to assess what the atmosphere was like, and I went up to the fifth floor, I believe, to have a look at what operations were going on up there. I had a quick look and then came back down to that kind of mezzanine area, and that was the point when everything started to move back down to that mezzanine floor, so that we were commanding operations from that particular stairwell just inside the door above the mezzanine floor.
Just following up on that last answer, if I can, you say you went up to the sixth floor. Roughly what time was this, or relating to your time of arrival, 2 o'clock, 2:10?
I would say after about 10 or 15 minutes of arriving, there were a lot of firefighters that were kind of arriving at that particular pinch point, because obviously we'd made pumps 25. The message possibly outside was to send everyone up to the bridgehead, which everyone thought was on the fourth or fifth floor. So everyone was heading up there, and it just became rather congested. So when we're looking to move the bridgehead, one of the tasks that I keep referring to Group Manager Welsh, but he's a DAC now. I'm referring to Group Manager Welsh because that was obviously his rank at that time. He asked me to go and have a look at what the atmosphere was like up the stairwell to see how far we could get people without breathing apparatus. I think it was evident that we were using a lot of air supply to get up to the higher floors, and any kind of way that we could limit that by using the safe air that we could, we should look at that. I went up and had a quick look, and I got as far as the sixth and thought, no, you need breathing apparatus beyond this point, and then came back down, and that's at the point where the mayhem of that pinch point needed addressing, and then I was given that task of kind of being a doorman. Okay.
Can I just ask you one or two follow-up questions about the conditions in the stairwell when you went up? Now, you've put the time at, you say, I think 10 or 15 minutes after arriving. So would that be between 2:15 or 2:20, 2:25? If you arrived at 2 or 2:10, as you told us yesterday?
It is extremely difficult for me to give you any times because, as I said, as ridiculous as it might have sounded, I arrived, it was dark, and the next thing I know, I went outside and it's light. Any time frames in between then, I was on autopilot, dealing with just issue after issue, and I had no concept of time. So, I can only estimate.
What were the conditions in the stairs like, so far as the air was concerned?
The air was, by policy that we looked to apply, I would say that the stairwell wasn't a breathable atmosphere. However, you could go up to it. You did have vision. You could see quite clearly up to about the sixth floor. But obviously there was a very strong smell of fumes. So even though it might look clear, it might not necessarily be clear. So I think the decision not to take any action to get nearer to the sixth without breathing apparatus would have been the right one. So when we moved the bridgehead, or when Richard moved the bridgehead back down onto the mezzanine level, I think that was entirely appropriate because of the hazards of risk that are in the stairwell to people without breathing apparatus.
Did you look into any of the lobbies?
Well, Richard was already in a lobby on the fourth or fifth floor. When I went up and had a quick look where the lift shaft was, there was some space up there, but it was quite, you could see there was smoke in those particular areas where the flat doors are.
Right. Okay. But about this time, are you sure that the bridgehead was where you say it was, or was the bridgehead on the second or perhaps by then the 3rd floor?
The layout of the building isn't as clear as it looks, in my opinion. So the small doorway at the top of the mezzanine level, whatever the first flats through a staircase were, whatever floor that was, that's where I think it was Watch Manager Brown was working there, along with a lot of other firefighters. Now, whether that was the 4th, the 3rd, I don't think it was the 2nd, because the mezzanine floor would have been, if you went in through that top doorway, you would have been higher than the 2nd, I think. So maybe it was the 3rd or 4th, but it was the 1st floor where residents' flats were, whatever floor that was.
Right. Now, what did you understand, or rather who did you understand, to be giving crews their briefs which reflected the FSG advice that was coming in? Who was giving them their briefs? Do you remember?
No, I can't answer that question, okay, because all I can do is assume that it was Richard that was liaising with FSG in order to brief staff to go up. It may have been the only other officer I know was Gareth Cook. It might have been him, but I don't know the correct answer to that question.
Right. Were the crews being tasked by those organising the FSGs? Were they on the ground floor, or were they at the bridgehead when they were being tasked?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah. Were the crews being tasked by those organising FSGs on the ground floor, or were they at the bridgehead?
Now, again, the clearest memory I've got is probably slightly later in the incident, where the FSGs were being managed by Pete Wolfenden and crews were being briefed, but that was on the ground floor.
Right.
So I'm aware of some actions that might have happened higher up, maybe on that top mezzanine deck, but I'm not exactly clear as to what was happening there. But I definitely know that on the ground floor, Pete Wolfenden and Glyn Williams were managing and briefing crews from the ground floor level using one of the upright walls to hang all of their paperwork and notes on.
Did you observe any crews actually being instructed to go to a particular floor at any time?
Richard Welsh was briefing crews to go up to certain floors, and I believe Pete Wolfenden or Glyn Williams, whoever was managing FSGs at that stage, were briefing crews to go up to the floors to deal with those FSGs that they had received.
Did you see or hear any of those briefings?
No, because I'm on the mezzanine floor, which is 2 kind of floors up, looking down over the balcony at the crews below who were at the FSG briefings that would have been below 2 floors. I wouldn't have heard the detail of the briefing.
I see. Did you notice whether they were given pieces of paper? The crews were given pieces of paper?
I can't honestly answer that. The only bits of paper I knew, I recall later on Pat Goulbourne holding bits of paper that I think he got from the FSG team, but that was slightly later.
Do you recall any discussions between you and Group Manager Goulbourne or Pete Wolfenden or anybody else running the bridgehead as to how to deploy the BA resources so as to maximise their impact and effect?
Slightly later, when then Group Manager Goulbourne was in charge of the BA resources that were going up to the floors, I definitely witnessed detailed briefings then. Prior to that, you have to appreciate that we were in a transitional kind of situation, that we had to move a bridgehead, move BA entry control, and start maybe getting some more organisation and command and control on the sheer huge numbers of firefighters that were coming into the building that needed briefing, and also dealing with the people that were coming out that had vital information. So collecting information on one hand, to use to brief other crews to go up was happening, and I witnessed Group Manager Welsh doing that amongst all of the mayhem, and
Right.
yeah.
What was your actual brief at that time? In other words, when you first arrived at the bridgehead?
Well, when I first arrived, like I said, it was very chaotic around Group Manager Welsh, and sometimes it takes a few minutes to see what's going on and get a feel of what you can do to to be effective as an officer arriving and helping in that moment. So, at one point for a few minutes, I stood back and watched what Group Manager Welsh was doing and who he was briefing and getting a feel for what was happening. Of course, while that's happening, more and more firefighters are arriving that want to go up to the floors. The place is getting more congested, and I think the natural response of Group Manager Welsh was to say, look, we need to stop this, and that's when I got the brief to go up the doorway that was at the top of the second floor, the top mezzanine level, and stop anyone coming in that didn't have a brief from him or a brief from FSG or weren't contributing to the IC's plan. If you can imagine someone outside of the resourcing that was going on outside of the building must have still thought that the bridgehead was on the fifth or second, third floor, and we're briefing people to go up there. So there were lots of people arriving in breathing apparatus sets, not under air, just walking up the stairs to get in to want to help, because the professional attitude of every single firefighter that saw that night, they just wanted to get in and do the best they could. So there comes a point as managers where we have to kind of say, well, we all want to go in and do the best we can, but we need to do it in a controlled, managed way. And while that pinch point was happening at that top stairwell, it probably wasn't as effective as it could have been. So in order to stop that, Group Manager Welsh gave me the job, go on like a door person on that door, don't let anyone through.
Okay. Did you at any time observe a watch manager, particularly Watch Manager Watson, briefing BA crews on the mezzanine? In other words, the balcony which overlooks the lobby. If
that was the watch manager that was in charge of BA entry control, or...
No.
Then I'll be honest with you, without seeing a picture of him, I don't know who the watch manager watching is. Me and faces and names aren't fantastic.
Okay, well, we'll see what we can do about that.
Thank you.
In the meantime, can I show you or ask you about page 12? You say at the second paragraph on page 12, two-thirds of the way down that paragraph, while managing the doorway to the stairs, you say, I also created a pool of BA wearers on the landing level.
Yeah.
When Group Manager Welch needed people, he would shout down, I need 2 in BA, or I need 4 in BA. And I would let 4 in who would go up to be briefed. So first of all, it looks from that as if their briefing would happen after you'd let them through, and not before you'd let them through.
No, so
Is that right?
the way that I've worded that probably doesn't take a time constraint into that is what's happening. I did create a staging area for BA wearers. At one point it was on the top second floor level, but then it got quite congested, and as we were retreating more, I took that kind of staging area down to the ground floor. So that kind of the way I worded that probably isn't correct, and that initially it was on the same floor, that top mezzanine floor. So when Group Manager Welsh needed someone, we're on the same level, and the staged area is behind me, and I take the next floor, whether we wanted SDBA or EDBA, and then the next floor would go on, and then we'd all kind of move up the stairs. Again, that started to be probably not that effective, so we moved everything down to the ground level, and that's where I could divide then the two groups of BA wearers and non-BA wearers, ready to kind of resource whatever the needs were of the bridgehead.
You say in that last answer that you would take the next floor whether we wanted SDBA or EDBA. Just focusing on that, who made the decision as to whether to call for EDBA wearers or SDBA wearers?
It was Group Manager Welsh until
Right.
Group Manager Goulbourne took over that particular task.
Okay. Do you know how he came to his decision as to which to choose, EDBA or SDBA?
Well, I think you'd probably have to ask them that. I can only assume.
You didn't have a discussion with them about it, did you?
No.
All right.
No. I think I could hazard a guess, but it would be better for you to hear it from
No,
them.
don't guess. Did Group Manager Welch or latterly Goulbourne ever ask you to prioritise grouping or gathering EDBA wearers as opposed to SDBA wearers?
Well, there were two groups beside each other.
They lined up separately, did they?
Yeah.
I see. So you could just call off as you wanted.
Yeah. And, it would be a group there. I need 4 of you, or I need 2 of you, whatever it might be.
Just going back, if I can, in your statement, please, to paragraph 11, you say in the third paragraph on that page, 5 lines up from the bottom, 4 lines up, and this is back to communication from the second balcony. I spent quite a lot of time shouting at them from that balcony as I had to communicate with them on several occasions, so I knew exactly what they were doing. Now, the they there is Pete Wolfenden and he who we now know to be Glyn Williams. My question is, what were you communicating to them?
Finding out what floors they were committing to, because I think, again, the memory of what I would have shouted down, other than one particular occasion, I don't recall. But I know that they were sending people up to a variety of floors, and so was Richard. So it may have been that Richard was asking me to find out what floor they were committing to, so that we didn't double attend the same floor or room, say. Because we were getting information back from the BA crews that were coming down, and I think he was consciously trying to tie up so that we didn't overlap and, to be as efficient as we can.
I see. So, summarising it, it sounds as if, and tell me if this isn't right, that Pete Wolfenden and Glyn Williams were giving crews their briefings as to which floor to go to. You were finding out what those were, but leaving it ultimately to group managers Welch and then Goulbourne actually to make the final decision as to where to deploy them.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, on pages 12 to 13 of your statement, you say, at the bottom of 12, at the top of 13, that Group Manager Welch was getting information back that some floors were so well alight that the probability of anyone being alive was next to 0. So he didn't want crews going up there. And you go on to say, Group Manager Welch told me that he wouldn't be sending the crews he was managing above a certain floor, as it was too dangerous for our crews to be sent to the top floors. Then you go on to say, 2 lines on from that, I don't know when he told me that or exactly what floor it was, but it was around the 15th floor. And just a couple of questions about that. First of all, did he tell you that in person?
Yes.
He did. And was it your understanding that he thought that there were no active FSG calls from above that floor or those floors?
Again, I don't know the answer to that question.
Do
all I know is that he had made a decision that the 15th floor above that was too dangerous, if it was the 15th floor, to commit any more crews. Whether he got the information from the crews that were coming back down,
right,
and then using that to make his, we kind of like to use the information of crews that are coming down to brief crews that are going up. So if the information was so risk critical that he felt we didn't want to commit any more crews above that, then that was what was relayed to me. Whether we were acknowledging FSGs above that particular floor, that would be a question for Group Manager Welsh.
Very well.
Dak Welsh.
Do you know, from your knowledge, yes or no, whether he checked the position about whether there were FSG calls above the, say, 15th floor with the officers managing the FSGs on CU7 or in the lobby?
Again, he would have to answer that one. I don't know what his communication links were with the FSG command unit.
Okay.
I can hazard a guess. I'm pretty sure he did, but I can't. I didn't witness that, so I can't answer that question.
And would the same follow in relation to checking with the control room?
Correct. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, on page 13 of your statement, you say, I had to stop a crew going up to you say, I had to stop a BA crew going up, as despite Group Manager Welch telling me that he didn't want anyone going above the 15th floor, they were still being committed to floors above that level. Now, do you remember when that took place during the night?
Again, timings for me are,
right.
It would have been obviously prior to Pat Goulbourne taking over the role of, of bridgehead staff, BA management.
Right.
It would have been possibly half an hour into the incident from when I took up my role.
That's helpful. Going on then to the next page 14 in your statement, just picking that up further, you say, from that point on, Pete Wolfenden didn't send any rescues. I'm sorry, this is the second paragraph. Didn't send any rescues to FSGs that were above a certain floor. He wouldn't have sent any firefighters above that level and would have focused on where the most savable life was, which was on the lower floors. This was the first interaction that I had in saying how things went at the bridgehead. I don't remember how long I'd been in position for when this happened. It might have been 20 to 30 minutes or an hour. Is that the same time point that you just referred to a moment ago in your answer about saying about half an hour?
Yeah, so previous to that paragraph, I think I've worded it in a way that I've observed the FSG crews are going up above the 15th floor. I've already been briefed from Group Manager Welsh that he didn't want anyone going above the 15th floor. It's too dangerous. So obviously there may have been he hadn't got round to briefing the FSG crews to that effect yet. So, I had to take like an immediate action to stop the crews from going up there because it was too dangerous.
Do you recall a general withdrawal of the stay put advice being announced?
No, I didn't have a command role at this incident. I wasn't there to support. So I wouldn't have been in the information loop or the communication loop for that sort of decision or that sort of information.
Right. Now, you say at the bottom of page 13 of your statement, just going back to the question of communication, if I can, you say in the last paragraph there, it was a bit of an issue, and I should just show you, I think, the end of the paragraph before. You say, I told Pete Wolfenden not to commit any crews above the 15th floor. Group Manager Welch has told me he doesn't want any crews above that level as it's too dangerous. Again, first, is this the same
time
discussion? Right,
yeah.
Same time, fine. And then you say it was a bit of an issue for a while as Pete had a list of FSGs to manage, which are probably on 15th, 16th, 17th and higher floors. You say probably. Is that speculation on your part, or did you know or have a reason to say it was they were on those floors?
Not sure how to word the reply. It was kind of obvious that he had.
Right. Okay. Obvious from what?
From the fact that he still wanted to commit above the 15th floor, from the fact that all floors were, initially involved with FSG, the actual detail of how many calls on each floor and where we were of dealing with each one, I wasn't privy to that information. So I can say it's an assumption that he wanted to go above the 15th floor.
I see.
Because it was so passionate when I stopped it.
Yes, I understand. You then say that Pete Wolfenden, this is 3 lines up from the bottom, also had an issue with me stopping those crews going up to those floors. Did he? What did he say to you? Do you remember?
Well, just wanted to inquire why I was stopping people. Obviously, in a support role, you're not in a command decision-making position. So, with I suppose the emotions of the night, the attitude of every single person that wanted to get into the incident and get up and save life, to suddenly kind of say, well, no, we're not going to do that, it's going to be a very emotional decision. So, and I could see that Pete was so kind of dedicated in what he wanted to do to get people up to start rescuing people, and wasn't aware that Group Manager Welsh didn't want anyone to go above the 15th. And it was very obvious that there was an issue, and we exchanged words for a few moments, and then again it was obvious that the only way that we were going to resolve this in a quick and efficient way was for me to advise Pete to go and speak to Group Manager Welsh, which he did, and that was a matter of seconds, struck maybe a minute. And when he came back, everything was clear and we moved forward. So,
in the next sentence, you say he's been tasked to do that. I'm sorry, going back to where we were, at the second line of the last paragraph on page 13. Just so you've got it. You say he's been asked to do that by the FSG command unit, yet communication was so difficult. Well, whatever Group Manager was thinking wasn't communicated to the command unit, which wasn't fed to the FSG team. It wasn't flowing like you would expect it to. How would you expect the information to flow between Group Manager Welch and Station Manager Wolfenden?
Well, again, the environment was completely unprecedented. We had more radio traffic, we had more people, more workloads than we've ever experienced before. Now, if we would go to one room alike in the same building, then you would expect a really fluid exchange of information between the incident commander, the person that's working at the bridgehead, and the FSG commander. It's all triangulated. The channel 2 that we can implement for command and control. Sometimes even channel 1 on our radios is quiet enough for us to be able to communicate effectively from a command and control perspective. On that night, there was so much radio traffic, it wasn't as easy as it could have been.
Right. And was that affecting the search and rescue process, did you think at the time?
No, because the search and rescue process was about getting as many people up to the floors as we can, as quickly as possible. Now, we had the right amount of resources there. The staging area was always kept up to I must have had about 20 to 30 firefighters waiting to get in. We had guys that we were committing to the teams that were committed to the floors that we knew were safe enough to commit to, and we were doing the best that we could to effect as many rescues as we could using the resources that we had. The communication of it was very simple, very brief, and I think was the best that we could do under those circumstances.
Did you yourself consider the need to report Group Manager Welch's decision about not committing floors, not committing BA crews above the 15th floor in response to FSG calls? Did you report that back to the command unit? Which by that stage was CU7.
Yes, that's not my role to do that.
Not your role to do that. Were you actually in the command structure yourself?
As I said earlier, I was there as support to the bridgehead. I wasn't in the command role.
Right. And did you think at the time, even though you weren't in the command structure, that decision should have been communicated back to CU7?
It would be normal if we had good lines of communication and were working under the normal conditions. That would naturally happen.
I see. Can I then ask you to look at page 15 of your statement, in the middle paragraph there, where you say at the start, around the time that the bridgehead was being moved down, another group manager Pat Goldborn, then arrived. It was quite comforting to see someone I know turn up and knowing how they perform. Now you go on to say, and I'm summarising it, that he was given a brief by Group Manager Welch, and you go on to describe it, is to assess each floor and then start committing crews to each floor, which is probably what we should have been doing for the last hour. Do you see that?
Yep.
Was that right, that Group Manager Welch briefed Group Manager Goldborn? Is that
Well,
the way around it went?
I mean, when Pat Goldborn arrived, we work under span of control of 5 things. You can manage quite comfortably. Group Manager Welch had, probably in excess of 20, 30 things to manage. So when Group Manager Goldborn arrived, and could take over once, a large section of Group Manager Welch's work, which is normal practice for us, it became easier and more focused. The problem is that I didn't have all the information from Group Manager Welch about everything that was going on that he was doing, because I didn't need to know that. So when I say we should have been doing that from the start, we may well have been doing that from the start, but it wasn't the bit of detail that Group Manager Welch had given me. So he may well have been committing to each floor, and he may have well just handed that over to Pat Goldborn. But the actual information and the detail wasn't shared with me. When Group Manager Goldborn arrives, I'm involved, I can hear the briefing, and Group Manager Goldborn gave me quite a detailed thing that he wanted, and from that point on, we went on in a more focused way.
Right, I see. When you say in your statement that you needed to assess each floor and then start committing crews to each floor, what exercise was involved in that assessment, which wasn't happening before?
It might have been happening before. That's my point. So crews coming down, getting information from the BA crews that are coming down, getting as much information as we can from the sources that we have. That's what we do to make decisions to go forward. So Group Manager Goldborn would have been liaising with the FSG team, would have been liaising with any source of information he could get before committing crews then to the floors in order to prioritise them. We both kind of agreed that we should work from the point of the most dangerous point in that building, where we can't go beyond. We should start from there and work backwards.
But by just focusing on my question a little bit more, perhaps, when you say needed to assess each floor and then start committing crews to each floor, do you mean by that you would take the information from crews that had been in the building and were arriving back at the bridgehead?
Yes.
And use that as the basis of your assessment as to where to send people next?
Maybe not a basis, but a contributing factor.
A contributing factor.
Yeah.
Okay. And you say that probably should have been happening, which is probably what we should have been doing for the last hour. Was it your view at the time that there was inadequate assessment of information coming from crews arriving back at the bridgehead?
No, as I said earlier, I wasn't aware of the detail of what Group Manager Welch was doing. He may well have been doing that and then getting exactly the same information from the crews coming down that Group Manager Goldborn was getting.
Right. So that's why I ask you, why do you say which is probably what we should have been doing for the last hour?
It's probably a poorly written by me.
Because the suggestion there is that this was a change and that there hadn't been enough assessment before.
The change is that at one Group Manager Welch I wasn't aware of how he was doing what he was doing because I didn't need to know at that particular time. No. When Group Manager Goldborn came along, I was involved and knew the detail of how he was going to move from that point forward. Right. So, what I've written there doesn't really reflect, doesn't it describe well what I experienced.
Now, just moving ahead, on page 16 of your statement, in the middle paragraph, third paragraph down, you say at the start, Group Manager Goldborn asked me to get 2 pools of BA wearers together. Now, my question is that something that happened only once he arrived, or had there been 2 pools or 2 parallel lines, as I think you described earlier, before Group Manager Goldborn's arrival?
Well, the thing is that initially there weren't as many EDBA wearers as there were later on in the incident. So there would have been each particular BA wearer has got a different colour cover on their breathing apparatus. So there would have been some orange, and standard BA would have been a different colour and would have been probably a lot more of them. And because we needed the EDBA wearers to go up to the more further points of the building, it was just that we didn't have as many as we wanted initially. When they started arriving, I was then able to make dedicated separate pools rather than just a corridor with a few different colours.
Yes. Now, just on this pools, first of all, was this creation of these separate pools before or after the bridgehead had moved down to the ground floor? Do you remember?
I was pooling the teams before we moved down to the ground floor. Yeah.
You started before you moved down, and
yes.
did that then continue after you'd moved
yes.
down to the ground?
Yeah.
And you say, just if I can ask you to look at your contemporaneous notes and go to page 2, in answer to question 13, what do you actually do? You say, I created 2 pools of BA wearers, EDBA and SDBA. Sorry, I'm going a bit too quickly. If you look at that, and you say, I ensured I had a healthy number maintained in each pool and liaised with SM Walton in order to maintain numbers. You say earlier on, just now, that you, at the beginning, there weren't that many EDBA wearers as there were later on. Did you always have a healthy number in each pool, or at the start were there not enough EDBA wearers?
I think I don't recall searching round for EDBA wearers. There was always enough to commit, but to be really kind of, I suppose, comfortable, you always want to have a lot more resources standing by than you actually need, and then that was a position I wanted to get to. So I never had to say to Group Manager Welsh or Goulburn, we haven't got those crews. There was always enough resources, but a more comfortable position to be in is to have a lot more ready and available. So one of my tasks that I was given was to estimate how many we've been using up to that point in the last, I think it was 30 minutes I might have done, how many we're using, so that we could then estimate how many we're going to need going forward. And using those rough figures, make sure that I had enough reserve to support that.
Now, continuing with this text in your contemporaneous note, you say, when GM Goulburn requested a team, I would dispatch the required number and BA type to the ECO ready for briefing. Just going back to the point we were on earlier on, that briefing, I think was, you said earlier, being done actually by Glyn Williams and Pete Wolfenden, and then by Group Manager Welch, or later Goulburn, as opposed to the entry control.
So FSG rescues would have been briefed by Wolfenden and Williams, and crews that were going up dealing with a more systematic approach of checking each floor and making sure that each floor was systematically searched would have been conducted by Group Manager Welsh, which then was taken over by Group Manager Goulburn. The B-entry control officer would have been briefed as to some of the detail and how we achieved that. Now, again, you'd have to speak to Group Manager Goulburn and Welsh to see what they were advising the B-entry control officer to how to detail them. I can hazard a rough guess what they might have said.
Okay, but I think the point I get out of this is that the briefing was also contributed to by the entry control officer.
Yeah. It's a team thing on the bridgehead. Yeah. There's separate jobs that we are all involved in supporting and controlling and maintaining the safety of all the staff that get entered in BA. So we've all had a little bit to play in committing a crew up into an upper floor. But the overall responsibility and direction, the kind of strategy of how we're going to do it, would have been done by the bridgehead commander, which is Welsh at one point, and then delegated to Goulburn for the latter part.
You say in the same paragraph there that you liaised with Station Manager Walton in order to maintain numbers. That's numbers of EDBA wearers.
Yep.
How did you communicate with Station Manager Walton?
By radio until there were points where it was too where the radio traffic was too busy, because he was regularly coming into the foyer to check what my needs were. I was able to use both radio and face-to-face, giving a request about what I needed. And it wasn't just BA, whereas it was all bits of equipment that I needed. I would ask him to get it, and then he would go outside and arrange that and have it brought in. Whether it was people, equipment, that was what he was doing, kind of a support role to me as well as everyone else that was asking him to do things.
Did you experience any communication difficulties by radio with Station Manager Walton?
Only nothing that affected what we were doing. So if I couldn't get through to him, it was only a matter of a minute or so before he was back in the foyer anyway, and I could speak to him face to face.
Was there a time when you ever became aware that there were, or might have been, long queues of EDBA wearers who had unplugged their sets from their vehicles but were waiting for deployment for some time?
So the staging area for my EDBA wearers, I made the lift shaft on the ground floor. I put everyone in there, so I knew where they were, and when I need them, I would come and would come a request, right, another 4, another 2. So I used the lift entry on the ground floor as my staging area. I believe outside there were also more EDBA wearers waiting to come in and top up my staging area, which Station Manager Walton would have been helping me with that, with maintaining a really healthy amount of resources ready to commit to the upper floors.
On page 19 of your statement, just moving to a different topic if I can, you say in the 4th paragraph that you went out to do a 360 of the building. I'm summarising what you say there. And update Group Manager Goldborn as to what you've seen and to continue with the resource management exercise. Did you brief Group Manager Goldborn as a result of what you found?
Yeah.
And what did you tell him?
Again, the exact detail I don't remember, but the rough message was carry on with what we're doing, because it's still evident from outside the building that fire hasn't taken over the whole of the floors below the 15th.
Now, in that paragraph, which is, as I say, the 4th one on page 19, you say, we decided together that I should do this, that's a 360, as we thought it would be beneficial due to the poor communication link with the command structure. Can I just ask you about what you mean by poor communication link with the command structure? Could you just elaborate?
Again, I think the actual what communication was going on between Group Manager Goldborn and the command unit, he would be better placed to answer that. My impression was that, bearing in mind I'm tuned into Channel 1, which was a very busy channel, which wouldn't really have supported effective communication because so many people need to talk to each other. Group Manager Goldborn might have been on Channel 2, but I'm not aware of that. That he may have had a really good communication link, but I just wasn't aware of that. So to get me to go around and do the 360, it just felt like we would, because we were so committed and passionate and knowing what we wanted to do to get as many people in as we could, rather than relying on an external opinion, because that opinion would only be one-dimensional, what you could see from the outside. It would be better for me to go and get that opinion. So I did a very quick 360, looked at the fire damage, came back in with some supporting information for Pat to decide what he wanted to do from that point onwards.
So when you say command structure, I think from that last answer you mean the command unit.
Yeah.
Which command unit? Would that be the FSG command unit or the incident command unit?
The incident command unit.
Okay, the incident command unit. And who, at that time, when you decided to do the 360 for these reasons, was running the incident command unit? Do you remember?
No, the factual answer is no.
Right.
But I'm pretty sure it was AC Row by then.
Right. Okay. And you say in the same paragraph, just continuing, we were doing the best we could. This is 3 lines up from the bottom. We were doing the best we could, but we were not getting anything back about whether what we were doing was a good job, whether to carry on as we were doing or not. On 2 occasions I returned and said, yes, it's good, carry on. First of all, getting anything back, again, would that be feedback from AC Row in the command unit? Is that what you're talking about?
General feedback from, I mean, we had an ORT officer. I mean, this is at a particular phase of the incident. And later on, we get some good information because more officers are there, more officers have arrived, and we're getting more opinions, and more structure is starting to kind of evolve around the incident. So I'm talking about probably a window whereby we weren't getting every bit of information that we would probably have liked, but that did improve as the incident went on.
Right. And when you say, on 2 occasions I returned and said, yes, it's good, carry on, does that mean you went to the command unit?
No, I went and did a 360.
I see.
To get a better picture about where the fire and the fire damage and the fire, you know, what was alight, what wasn't alight.
Right, I see. So, in general terms, were you satisfied that AC Row knew what was going on at the bridgehead in terms of deployment, or did you think that he might think there were gaps in his information?
Again, you'd have to speak to Group Manager Goldborn about what information AC Row had, because that I'm not involved in that chain of command or that chain of communication.
On the next page, page 20, you say that after doing, and I'm summarising, but after doing one of the 360s and seeing the top 10 floors being 100% engulfed in flame and the sun was starting to come up, this is a quarter of the way down that page, you say, going on, I told Group Manager Goldborn about what I'd seen and advised him not to commit any more crews to these floors. I said that if the fire hasn't got the people up there, the heat's got them, and if the heat hasn't got them, the fumes, there wouldn't be no oxygen up there. Now, how did you make that assessment? Was it simply just by looking?
Yeah.
I see. And was a decision made by Group Manager Goldborn as a result of that? As a result of
I believe so, yeah. When I did that 360, what I saw was flames at every single window on the top 10 floors. I saw, I saw a situation that I didn't think was compatible with life. And because of that, and because of the information that we were getting back from the crews that were going up there, that together with the fact that we asked to, I think Pat got in contact with FSG or even Merton Control to see if we were still communicating with anyone above the 15th floor. And when you put those 3 things together, that's what made Pat and myself agree that going to the top 10 floors was not safe, because we've got a responsibility to our staff as well to ensure their safety. So that was one of the difficult decisions that we had to make that night.
Was a decision made as a result of what you saw not to commit any crews above the 10th floor? Not
purely on just what I saw. It was those 3 factors. We agreed before I went out that...
I'm sorry, then, you're quite right. I'll interrupt you and just put the question again. Was a decision made on those 3 factors actually not to commit crews above the 10th floor?
From what I recall, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you say the sun was starting to come up now. Would that be about the time that decision was made?
Yes, because when I went out and did that 360, I noticed that it was slightly brighter than my previous one, so that kind of let me know that the sun was imminent. So it may have been about 4 o'clock.
Yeah. Final question, or final set of questions. On page 30 of your statement, you tell us that there were difficulties with the communications. If I could just show you the second main paragraph on that page. Well, actually, I'll show you the first paragraph first of all. There were communications issues, you say, at Grenfell because of the sheer amount of people that needed to talk to each other. And you go on and explain that. And then in the next paragraph, you say, in the third line, there may have been some signal problems on the night as we set up the repeaters. These are a special bit of kit on the fire and rescue unit that helps you to take the strength of the radio signal further into the incident. We had those placed at certain places around the incident, but whether it helped or not, I don't know. I don't know who set these up. I must have been involved, as I remember the crews carrying them. You go on. Now, just a few questions about that. First of all, when you talk about signal problems, can you tell us what type of signal problems you encountered?
I didn't encounter signal problems, but the BA communications, the BA entry control and the officer that was communicating with the crews that were going up to the floors may have. My only contribution to that was to suggest that we get the repeaters set up because, as I said earlier, I'd been to the Shepherd's Bush fire where communication was quite difficult. So it just seemed right to get the repeaters set up. So I asked Andy Whiteman to get me some repeaters and then briefed one of the EDBA crews to go up and put them in the appropriate positions.
Apart from the volume, sheer amount of people that needed to talk, as you put it, apart from that, were there any other signal problems that you knew about?
Not that I'm aware of.
Right. What were the repeaters that you described?
Well, they just allow our communications to extend beyond what they currently might be. So if you wanted, let's say, if you were in a concrete box and you wanted to speak to someone that was around one of the corners, if you put a repeater on that corner, then it will, it'll carry on your signal, carry on the strength of your signal, so that you have better communication. It's clear and it's not broken up.
Do you remember where those repeaters were set up in the building?
Exactly where, no, but I would have briefed the crew where they would best be in place, and it would have been, it would have been so that they were effective in communicating to all of the floors where we were still committing crews to.
Yes, thank you. Could you just give me 1 second? On page 19 of your statement, if I can just ask you to go back to it, you say in the second, the first paragraph actually, the lifts weren't being used anymore. So this created a big space outside them for me to use as the holding area to put firefighters, which I filled up with EDBA wearers. Now, you described that a little bit more in your evidence this morning. Just focusing on the use of the lifts, you go on to say in the next paragraph, I don't know why we weren't using the lifts. In a high-rise block, you will have one lift designated as a fire lift. And then you go on to describe what that is, and then in the last sentence you say, I think I was under the impression that it wasn't working or broken as it wasn't being used. It might have been fine. Is the position that, well, first of all, did you ask anybody about whether the lifts were capable of being used?
Well, again, in hindsight, we wouldn't have used the lift because of the smoke that was in the whole of the building. So you couldn't use that lift in a safe manner. So whether the decision to not use the lifts was taken earlier on because of that, the smoke encroachment that would have been in the lift shaft. That's one piece of information that I didn't have that night, which other officers may well have.
When you say you couldn't use that lift in a safe manner, are you making any assumptions about whether the lift was a firefighting lift in the strict sense, or a fireman's lift, or had no firefighting functionality? What assumptions are you making about it?
A fire lift, yeah.
A fire lift.
Which we staff with a firefighter who runs up and down delivered to the bridgehead. So if the bridgehead's moved down to the lower floors, because it's we're on the ground floor anyway, then it would suggest that it was too smoky above there to use the fire lift.
So you're saying, are you, that just summarising what I think your evidence is, if these lifts had been functioning as firefighting lifts, they couldn't have been used safely anyway.
It was an old, yeah, it was an old style building. I wasn't aware if it was an old style fire lift or whether it was a firefighting compartment or a more newer style fire lift. I wasn't aware of that detail.
No.
I'm just assuming that it was too smoky as well. We didn't use it, or it was defective.
Right. So just to press the question once more, sorry. Even if it had been a functioning firefighter lift up to the mark, let's assume that, are you saying that it couldn't have been used safely anyway?
If it's smoky, yeah, you can't use it.
Right. Thank you. Mr. Myatt, thank you very much. You'll be glad to hear that I've come to the end of my questions. Okay. And I just want to say thank you very much for your patience in answering them and for your contribution to our investigations. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Myatt, it's obviously going to be convenient to have a short break at this point. Do you need me to ask Mr. Myatt to come back?
No.
In case of further questions?
Mr. Chairman, I don't believe I do, but perhaps the right way of approaching this, rather than invite anything, is not to release Mr. Myatt formally, but to let him go out of the room and not having come back when we do resume, a message can be got to him.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Myatt, I think the upshot of all that is that you probably have finished giving us all the evidence that you can, and for which we are, of course, very grateful. It'll be very helpful to us. We're going to have a break now anyway. Can I ask you, please, not to leave the witness room until you get a message from the usher saying that you are certainly free to go. It's just possible that something may arise on which we might need your further.
Okay.
All right?
Yeah, thank you.
But anyway, thank you very much for coming. No, we need a brief break
Yes.
for a changeover time, don't we?
Changeover time for witness, changeover time for counsel.
Yes, so would 20 to 11 be all right? Does that give us enough time?
I believe it would. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, well, I'll rise until 20 to 11. Yes, Mr. Kinnear. Now we're going to have the next witness, are we?
Yes, and first of all, I should confirm that Mr. Myatt is free to go. There were no further
Yes,
questions.
thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes, might I call Alan Moore?
Sure.
Take the book in your raised hand and repeat the words for me. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
will be the truth,
will be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but it.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moore. Sit down and make yourself comfortable.
Thank you.
All right. Yes, Mr. Kinnear.
First of all, would you please confirm your name for the record?
Alan Moore.
And hopefully in front of you, you have a blue file. And if you turn to the first tab in that file, hopefully you'll find a statement you prepared for the police. Is that right?
That's correct.
And if you turn further into that file, hopefully you'll find contemporaneous notes behind the next tab.
Yes.
And if you turn on again, hopefully you find Exhibit AJM2, which is a map you drew.
That's correct.
And finally, AJM3 behind the next tab, which is a plan of the tower. Is that right?
That's correct.
Thank you. And have you read each of those documents recently?
I have.
And do you confirm that their contents are true?
Yes,
And you're content for those documents to stand as your evidence in the inquiry?
I am.
Thank you. Mr. Moore, before we start, if at any time you need a break, please say so. That's not a problem.
Thank you.
Secondly, if I put a question to you that's unclear, please say that's unclear, and I'll do my best to make it clear.
Thank you.
Now, very helpfully, you provided the statement. I don't intend to go through all of it with you. The particular point I'm concerned to discuss with you today is FSGs and your role in the handling of FSGs. Now, if I can just establish some basic details before we start. First of all, you joined the LFB in 1987, is that right?
Yes.
And you're recently retired.
Yes.
And so in total you had 30 years service or so.
Yes.
And at the time of the fire, you were a watch manager at Chiswick assigned to Red Watch, is that right?
That's correct.
And on the night, you were mobilised at 0126, you were mobile at 0130, and at the scene at 0139. Does that sound about right to you?
I thought it was a bit earlier, but if the
But if you take that from the data provided by the LFB, that sounds
Yes.
about right. Now, first of all, could I ask you, just by way of background, your arrival at the tower, and if I ask you to turn to page 5 of your witness statement, and the third paragraph, fourth line. Now, that will also come up on the screen as well, Mr. Moore, so it's up to you which you find more convenient. It's on the screen or on paper in front of you. At the third paragraph, fourth line, you say, I remember asking Mike, that's Mike Dowden, what do you want? In your contemporaneous notes, you stated that you were asked to supply as much hose as possible. Now, looking back now, can you remember whether you suggested the provision of more hoses to Watch Manager Dowden, or did he order you to provide more hoses?
on arrival, I told my crew to remain on the appliance, radios on, and I would approach the tower and find out what we wanted in means of equipment or personnel. I saw Mike Dowden, who I already knew because he used to be at Chiswick Fire Station. I said to Mike, what do you want? And he said, I don't know, I've done everything. And before he could continue, I said, well, I do apologise, let's get a shitload of hose up here and branches because we're going to need it.
Okay.
He was going to say, but I interrupted him. He was doing building blocks to put a procedure into place.
And what plan did you have in mind to what purpose were you going to put the hoses to?
On my arrival, I could see that we were going to need hoses, a lot more hoses. There were no hoses outside, no hoses in, and there were people running up with hoses up the road as I walked up. So I ordered my crew to bring all the hose, all the branches, and if they saw anyone else coming towards the tower without hose or branch, to send them back
And
to
that-
get BA.
And that was for internal and external firefighting, is that
Yes,
right?
yes.
Now, at page 5 of your witness statement, 3 lines from the bottom of that page, you refer to burning plastic like a spider web material falling onto your helmet. Do you know what that material was?
At the time I didn't. It was just like a spider's web. It was covering everything, the visor and the tunic. It was just, you could just pull it off. It was just a very flimsy material which was coming down from above.
And turning over the page to page 6 of your witness statement and the third paragraph on that page, you referred to smashing glass falling from quite a height. Put bluntly, did you assume at the time that the windows were falling out of many flats?
At the point when I heard the shattering glass, I was in the foyer area with an adult female casualty. We were about to egress the building and I heard like a waterfall of glass coming down. I stopped the lady from leaving, held on to her, and I thought that the building was coming down. And as soon as it stopped, I saw the exit and I said to her, run, run. We ran together and we ran onto the green at the side elevation, sector 2.
And did you think the glass was falling windows, basically?
Yes, and yes.
And given it was windows falling out, did you have any thoughts at the time as to what the implications might be for the likelihood of fire re-entering or entering the building again?
Sorry.
Given that the windows were falling out, what thoughts did you have as to what the best means was of firefighting, given that fire would be able to get back into the tower from the outside?
If the windows were, I remember thinking that if the windows were breaking and falling, that it's going to make it much more difficult for us to ingress and egress the building. And we'd have to reevaluate and reassess our entry to the building.
And did you discuss that with Watch Manager Dowden at any time?
No, I didn't see Mike after that.
Okay. And did you discuss those issues with any other senior officer?
No.
And did you discuss the possibility of full or partial evacuation of the tower with any other senior officer?
No.
Okay. Staying on page 6, looking at the penultimate paragraph on that page and lines 3 to 5, you refer to checking on the ALP and the TL ladders. Looking back now, how would you assess the effectiveness of the ALP in fighting the fire on the evening?
There was, when I was asked to supply a salt water supply to an aerial platform, which was positioned on the grass area at sector 4 where the fire had started. I managed to secure a machine, ordered the crew to find an alternative supply because the road run supply that was originally on. That was set in position. There was another TL to the left of the building as you look from the original fire point. That machine was attempting to get up, but due to the amount of debris coming down, it was deemed that it was not going to be possible for that to stay in that position. It was housed again, and by that time it was impossible to back the machine out, so it was half backed under the mezzanine floor to the left of the tower, and it left in situ, and that's where it remains inoperative because we could get it up due to the debris.
Can I now ask you about fire survival guidance calls, and you really start to deal with this at page 7 of your witness statement. If I can ask you some general questions first. Did you at any time report to the command unit CU8?
No.
Did you receive any briefing regarding the number of FSGs?
No.
Did you receive any briefing regarding the system for communicating FSGs from the command unit to the bridgehead?
No.
Now, first of all, if I can ask you about your assessment of the seriousness of the situation. At page 7 of your witness statement, the final paragraph, 2 lines up from the bottom, you say this: in my mind, I was thinking to myself, I know we aren't going to be able to get firefighters very high up in this building. Looking at it, you could see where it was going. You cannot put a crew up the tower 20 floors above the fire. My first question is this: did you consider whether evacuation, given that assessment, was a sensible step to take?
That wasn't in my remit. I was a watch manager and my duty was outside. There were other officers, incident commanders in charge, and that's the decision they would make.
Given your view and the advice you gave to Watch Manager Dowden to get more hoses available both for internal and external firefighting, can you explain to us what risks are posed by having hoses on stairwells in the interior of the tower?
The hoses were never on the stairwells. They were stacked outside the main entrance for crews that were being committed to the incident to take with them.
And were you aware of the availability of EDBA at the time when you first attended the scene?
I didn't know what the availability was at the time when I first attended. I assume that it would have been ordered on due to severity of the fire.
And so it follows from that you weren't aware of any system for prioritising EDBA to particular search and rescue?
No.
Okay. Now, the next matter I'd like to discuss with you is the handling of FSGs. And going back to page 7, the second paragraph, and it's line 13 onwards. Apologies, it's very difficult to count down, but you say this: there wasn't a dedicated appliance and crew dealing with the FSG calls. It was just one guy on his own. He didn't even have a vehicle. He was leaning on a parked car, receiving all the FSG information from a phone and writing it down onto a pad. The pad consisted of plain A4 white sheets of paper. Now, if I could ask Paul to put up a photo of the man leaning on the car bonnet. Now, you'll see, is that the car you were referring to there, Mr. Moore?
No, it was not.
Can you remember what car type, first of all, what make of car?
No, I can't.
No. Do either of the figures leaning on that bonnet look familiar to you?
No.
Can you recognise whether any of those two individuals is the man that you say was the guy dealing with the FSG calls?
I can't be sure. I thought the car was further back than that.
Okay, there is another photo which I might ask Paul to put up to see whether this assists. It may not. Now, you'll see in the foreground is Firefighter Charlie Batterby. You'll see a head. Is that the head of the gentleman who was, you recognise, leaning on the bonnet?
Possibly. From the angle of this photograph, it looked like that could be the car now because it seemed further back from the fire when I passed it.
Did you know that? Did you know the guy's name?
No.
No. Have you heard the name Paul Sadler?
No.
In terms of the system that was then operating for the management of FSGs, you said in your statement, second paragraph, line 16 onwards, I said to the CM taking these calls, are you all right? He said, I don't have a fucking clue. I said, would you like a hand? He replied, yeah. And I said, you write it down and I'll take it. Beyond that exchange, was there any other discussion of the system for handling FSG calls?
No, it would be inappropriate to interrupt the guy because he was on the phone and he was writing things down. The only thing I told him was to write the flat number and then the floor number as well. In my mind, it was a developing fire and we need to know which floor they're on. Generally, FSGs are dealt with as and when received and crews will be deployed. Yeah.
Just to be clear, so there was he gave you no explanation as to how he was communicating the FSG calls to the bridgehead? No. Okay. Do you remember whether if I can call him the guy, simply that's the term you used in your statement, do you remember whether the guy was taking the FSG messages via a mobile phone or was it by a handheld radio?
I believe it was a mobile phone.
Is that normal in these situations?
No, but it would have been normally a radio. On the fire ground, I would assume it would have been the radio, but if it had been on the command unit, it would have been the appliance, or the appliance would have been that telephone.
Okay. And do you know where the calls were coming from control or from the command unit?
I did not know.
Okay. Were you standing close to the guy so that you could hear what was the subject of the message that was being passed on?
I couldn't hear what was being said on the phone, but I could see him writing down, and I just was pointing at flat number, floor.
I realise it's difficult more than a year after the event and time can play tricks, but can you remember how long after you arrived at the scene that you went up to the guy and started to assist with the handling of FSG calls?
Initially, within a half an hour of arriving, I believe, 45 minutes.
Okay. And so if you arrived, say for the sake of it, at 20 to 2, it would be sometime after 2 o'clock?
About then, I'd say, yeah.
Now, you agreed that you would take pieces of paper to the bridgehead for him, and in particular, you advised him to write down the flattened numbers on those sheets of paper. Is that right?
Yes.
Now, if I might ask Paul to bring up LFB quadruple 0 1922 underscore 33. First of all, have you seen that document before?
It's not my writing, but it would have been one of the, it possibly is one of the ones that I took to the bridgehead.
When you say possibly, is it possible or is it likely? Are you able to give us a steer on that?
I would say more than likely, yes.
Okay, thank you. And that, is it right that you took the messages to the bridgehead on the second floor?
I believe it's the second floor, yes.
At that time, were any other people involved as runners taking FSG calls from the guy at the bonnet into the bridgehead?
Not that I was aware of. I returned back to the guy.
Now, you say that over the page, you don't necessarily have to go to this, but you think when you handed over the slips, you handed them over to someone called Brian O'Keefe.
Brian
Is that
O'Keefe,
right?
I believe that's correct, yes.
And did you know Brian O'Keefe before the
I
night?
did.
Yeah.
Yes.
And do you remember whether there was a female watch manager also there at the bridgehead?
I believe there was, yes.
And do you know, would you know her a name, for example?
Not offhand now, I can't remember.
When you were at the bridgehead handing over the FSG slips, did you see what system was in place for deploying search and rescue teams?
I saw the firefighters waiting to be committed and further on being briefed. So I assume that they were being held in one position, moving forward to be briefed, and then being committed to the incident.
And can you remember whether there were any EDBA wearers at the time waiting to be deployed?
I can't remember if there were then.
Did you get any sense that there was a prioritisation of deployments, for example, to the higher floors?
Not that I was aware of.
Did you have any sense as to the system for recording the results of search and rescue missions?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
When you were at the bridgehead, did you have any sense, did you witness, overhear any system for the recording of results of search and rescue missions that had been deployed in response to FSG calls?
No, I did not.
I'm now going to go to a separate topic. There's been a piece of paper described as an envelope that has attracted a degree of interest. I just want to see whether you've seen it before. And if I could also ask Paul to put up this document, which has been variously described as an envelope or a piece of paper. First of all, have you seen this before?
No.
You'll see roughly at the top the words Brett Loft IC. At the time you were assisting with the running of FSG calls, who did you understand to be the incident commander?
The incident commander, I wasn't aware that who was the incident commander.
Thank you. Do you remember whether the other FSGs you took to the fireground could have been written on control information forms or not, rather than the white sheet we've just seen?
I can't recall at this time, no.
Okay. What detail do you now remember of any of the FSGs you took from the car bonnet to the bridgehead?
The actual details on there, or flat numbers, or casualties, I didn't know. I didn't really look at those. I took those, we collated them in lower floors to higher floors, handed them to the bridgehead and explained that these were lower to higher.
Yeah. We'll come on to that later, but do you remember, for example, any FSGs in relation to flat 205 on the 23rd floor?
No, not I was aware of.
Did you yourself receive any FSG calls, whether by mobile phone or handheld radio?
No, not by myself.
The topic you referred to earlier on, the prioritisation of FSGs, I'd like to discuss with you. And it'd be most useful if you turn to page 8 of your witness statement and the third paragraph on that page. It's 5 lines, I think, from the bottom of that paragraph. You say that on first entry to the tower, you explained to the firefighters at entry control that the paperwork I was given them was FSG calls for the lower floors of the tower. Now, in ordering
Sorry,
it.
can I just
Sorry.
interrupt you? You might find, Mr. Moore, that it's easier to spot the passage on the screen
Oh, thank you.
because they'll highlight it and blow it up for you.
Thank you.
Any better? Yeah, I'm sorry.
Thank you, sir. Now, providing the lower floors, had you decided a system prioritisation for the bridgehead?
It wasn't a decision I made that was going to be put into place. It was seeing the developing fire and hearing the radio messages coming back saying they're having difficulty getting from, I believe it was the 11th to the 12th floor. The crews are having great difficulty in going any higher. The FSG guy didn't know which calls were coming in first, was unsure. So I said, well, let's just do the lower to higher and we'll let the bridgehead sort out where they've got people and they can make their own decision through the officer in charge, the incident commander.
And do you know what happened to the slips that concerned FSG calls from the higher floors? Were they simply put at the bottom of the pile of slips that you handed over to the bridgehead?
No, when I handed over these slips, I said these are in floor, lower to higher floor level. They were unsure of which calls are coming first, and they would collate them, I assume, there.
And did you say that to Watch Manager O'Keefe? Or yes.
Yeah, I told Watch Manager O'Brien O'Keefe that these were lower to higher floors, as we were unsure which, the guide was unsure which call would come in first, and given the circumstances the crews were experiencing on the higher floors, the bridgehead would know where the crews were, and they could make a judgment which, if someone was near that floor, it would be easier for them to go rather than send another crew past them to go to the other floor.
And once you'd explained that, did Mr. O'Keefe say anything in response to you?
He thanked me for him, said good idea, and that was.
Turning to page 9 of your witness statement, the second paragraph, and again it's probably helpful if you look at the expanded bit on the screen, it's probably easier. You say, I made my way back towards the fire, taking FSG calls who I'd previously spoken to and assisted before. He had collated more FSG calls onto a pad that had been put into floor order, lower to higher. And if I might ask Paul to put up MET 15731_1. (15731_1). Now, is that the list of calls that you're describing there in your statement?
I've never seen this sheet. I have no recollection of seeing that sheet.
Do you recognise the handwriting?
No.
Could I turn to, again, page 9 of your witness statement and the second substantive paragraph 4 lines down? You say this, that on your return from the first entry to the tower, a black guy who came up to me as I was doing this and said he was on the phone to his brother who was in the fire. There was a fire brigade borough commander or deputy assistant commissioner who came up to where we were standing. I said to the black guy, can he get out? To which the DAC said, are you talking to the brother? And the guy on the phone said, yes. The DAC replied, tell him to fucking get out and get out now. First of all, do you know the identity of the borough commander or DAC you've spoken to? Could I ask Paul to put up a photo of a DAC? Is that the gentleman?
Not that I recall.
No.
The gentleman, the senior officer that approached whilst I was doing the FSGs with the crew manager, was in full fire gear with a helmet and was literally listened into the phone call and said, if you're speaking to your brother, tell him to get out now.
Okay. If I can now change topic and turn to your second and final entry into the tower. Staying at page 9 of your witness statement, in the third paragraph you say this: "I then made my way back to Grenfell Tower to deliver the FSG paperwork to the entry control officers on the bridgehead. I went back into the tower for the second time via the main entrance on the south elevation to deliver the FSG calls. Upon entering, I noticed that the bridgehead had moved. On the first occasions I went, the bridgehead was located on the second floor. It had now been relocated to the ground floor on the mezzanine level inside of the tower. The time was approximately 0200 hours." Now, we know that the bridgehead was moved to the ground floor at or after 0309. You said that you started helping out with the FSGs around about 10, 20 past 2. In light of that, do you think your approximation of the time there as 0200 hours is right or not?
No. Given that evidence, no. At the time, time just flew.
When you came in the second time to the tower, and the second and final time, to whom did you deliver the FSG slips on that occasion?
There were assistants there. Now I remember it as Lou de Silva was the entry control officer. There were assistants to her. There were quite a few people around her. There were some senior officers standing with her, and I handed it to, it may have been Brian O'Keefe, maybe another officer, and explained to them exactly the same what I'd done before.
Again, prioritisation, lower first.
Yeah.
At that stage, when you taking the second clip of FSG calls, had the guy on the bonnet been able to make any effort at ordering them according to the time they'd been received, given that he was obviously had been dealing with them for a longer period of time by then?
Not that I was aware of, because when I went back to the car, excuse me, and was approached by the black gentleman, he'd already had another pile ready for me to go. After we told him to get his brother out and get out now, I took the next lot of paperwork up.
And when going back to your second trip to the bridgehead, at that stage, did you receive any information regarding the results of the search and rescue missions that had been deployed in response to the first clip of FSG calls you'd sent?
None at all.
No. Did you ask for any update on the position?
No, I had no need to.
And why did you have no need to?
It wasn't my remit. My remit was to supply the information to enable the crews to carry out the rescues, and I'd completed mine.
Could I ask you now to turn to page 15 of your witness statement, and it's the first substantive paragraph on that page. And you say at line 6, looking back, I also think that the FSG method that was used wasn't right. If there is a small fire in a block of flats, there wouldn't be that many fire appliances. The dedicated fire appliance dealing with FSG would have been really close to the building. This couldn't happen at Grenfell Tower as it's so congested with vehicles. Saying that, I do think we did the best we could with the FSG calls. Just to help us understand your evidence there, what is your essential concern regarding the operation of the FSG system on the night?
I think that my thought then was that we would have been closer, would have had a more structured plan, but given the actual fire, totally unprecedented, we were ad-libbing, and we had to ad-lib, because if we hadn't ad-lib, we would have lost more lives.
Can I now turn to your role as the sector safety officer, which you deal with at pages 11 to 12 of your witness statement? First of all, just to get basics right, am I right in assuming that Sector 1 was the south face of the tower?
Yes.
Do you remember the rank of the officer who designated you as the sector safety officer?
Yes.
What was that rank?
AC Andy Rowe.
Again, apologies for the difficult question. Can you remember the time of the evening when you were ordered to assume that role?
It would have been shortly after I took the last of the FSGs to the bridgehead.
Okay. So sometime after 10 past 3 or thereabouts?
Yeah. I was approached by Andy Rowe and said that I need you as a safety officer here.
And were you taking that role over from anyone?
No, I was safety officer. I was the initial safety officer.
What briefing, if any, did Mr. Rowe give to you?
The ingress to the building was through the main entrance. That was the only entrance and egress we had at the time. Crews needed to be deployed across, which was an ever-building mound of debris and hose. I was standing under a walkway, and the entrance to the flats were here, literally distance from myself to you. I was protected by the concrete stairwell. Initially, crews were building up, being sent to me. I was putting crews of 4 across, looking out, looking up from under the walkway, holding 4, making sure there was no debris, all clear enough to get across and go. And they went across.
Okay.
And the next lot will get ready.
So were you tracking reporting on fire spread, in summary, as one of your functions?
My main role as safety officer was safety of the crews and residents of the building. I deployed people across into the actual building, and they were designated further tasks from the officers inside.
And in order to discharge that function, did you have to keep I'm assuming you'd have to keep an eye on fire spread, because you'd have to take a view as to where the fire was so as not to put crews in danger?
Yes, so if I saw anything on the outside, I was radioing across to the actual building and tell them it's coming down. Because I remember looking when I first took that role, the fire was coming down the building rather than go up. And I remember looking and thinking, why are you coming down? Because you go up, you're fire, you go up, you don't come down.
Yeah.
But it was continually coming down. Andy Rowe on several occasions came back to me, and I reported what I was saying to him and told him I'd been reporting it across.
If I can ask you questions about that, did you report solely to Mr. Rowe in respect of fire spread?
No.
Who else did you report to?
The options, there were people standing in the doorway at the entrance to the building, and if I saw anything on the president, like I saw the gentleman that was eventually rescued waving the white piece of cloth, that was reported across to the bridgehead and to Andy Rowe as well. On numerous occasions, Andy Rowe came back and asked whether we got this guy yet, but we hadn't. But we were protecting him with a monitor from the above mezzanine.
And who was your point of contact at the bridgehead?
It was literally whoever I could get hold of, because there were so many firefighters standing in the actual mezzanine area, and I could only shout across what's coming and what's not.
And so it was basically you shouting you weren't relying on radio, you were just shouting across?
There was too much radio traffic. You just, if you stayed on the radio, you would have been blocking the airway, so it was much easier to shout across.
Okay. Now turn to a very different topic, and that's vents under the mezzanine. And if I could ask you to turn to page 12 of your witness statement, the 4th paragraph and 4th line. Now, that'll be expanded for you. And you say, you discuss their conditions at or near the main entrance to Grenfell Tower at about 0330, 0340, and you say this: I remember around this time there was a lot of wispy grey smoke. One second there was smoke, the next it would be clear. Now and again there would be a thick black smoke that would come out of the vents under the mezzanine. Now, if I could ask Paul to put up BLA quadruple 04531. And if you see in the middle of that photo, are those the vents that you were referring to?
That's the vents, yeah.
And can you describe for us how the smoke was coming out of the vents?
It was noticeable. I first noticed it because when I looked before, there were no smoke issues there, and quite randomly it would just puff out with smoke. Sometimes just a wisp, and then sometimes a lot of thick black smoke would come out. Then it seemed to go away, and then it'd come back again.
And was there any sound associated with the emanation of smoke coming from the vents?
I wouldn't ever hear that because there was so much noise around me.
And was there any regularity to the smoke coming out?
No, it's, as I say, it was random. One minute it was there, the next minute it wasn't.
Do you remember any active ventilation system working on the night?
No.
Again, apologies, going to a very different topic now. At page 11 of your witness statement, the first paragraph, you describe a man climbing out of a window by a sheet. And if, just for your reference, it's page 11 and the first paragraph on that page. First of all, timing. Are you able to give for us, on a rough and ready basis, the time of the evening in which you saw the man?
This would have been whilst I was a safety officer, so sometime after that.
Sometime after
Yeah.
10 past 3, 20 past 3
Yes.
or thereabouts. Okay. Are you sure it was the 12th floor he was on?
As I explained to the police officer who took my statement, it was one of the higher floors. It was, I assumed, higher than the guy that I'd seen with the piece of cloth waving. Yeah, so it was 12, 11th, 12.
So higher
It
up.
was a high floor, not a lower floor.
And how did you count the floors up when you were trying to estimate where the
It was
gentleman
very
was?
difficult because initially people were saying it was a 22-storey building, and then it was found out it was a 24-storey building. Then there were other rumours that it was 20 stories. But counting from the ground floor, with the mezzanine area, if you counted up, it didn't seem to ring true because there was like 1, 2. Coming down, it was given a different figure. So we assumed that the ground floor would originally be 2 floors. So then we counted up, and that's why we found the guy 9th, so he was higher, this guy.
And so there we go. It was definitely higher than the other gentleman
Yes.
that you discussed in your statement we'll come on to next.
As far as I recall.
Did the man climbing down by the sheet definitely make it into the floor below?
There was, he came down, and I remember saying to myself, and I said out loud, don't do it, just don't do it. He came down, and the window below him, he managed to put himself, so he sat inside the window and got in. There was a second person got onto the blanket or sheet, whatever it was, and I saw him move down quickly. I assumed he was falling. I turned away. When I looked back, he wasn't there, so I assumed he'd fallen, but I wasn't sure.
And did you report what you'd seen to anyone?
Yes, I told shouted across to the mezzanine floor, to bridgehead, that I'd seen this guy. It's about the 11th or 12th floor, and that he got into that flat, and within seconds of me telling that, making him aware of it, there was a big rush of fire come out of that window that he'd gone into. And in my experience, I assumed that he'd opened the front door and given oxygen to a fire, which was either in that flat or outside that flat.
Okay.
And it came out, and I assumed he'd perished.
Could I turn to a different topic again, and that's the question of the helicopter. And could I ask you to turn to page 14 of your witness statement, and it's the first substantive paragraph on that page, 6 lines down. And you say this, this led us on to talking about the helicopter that was circling Grenfell Tower, and you go on to say, I think this helicopter gave false hope to people. I think people in the tower thought they were going to be rescued from the building by a helicopter, like what happens in films. First of all, could you see anything in the way people were responding at windows or otherwise that led you to the view that false hope was being generated?
There were a lot of members of the public where I was cited as a safety officer, and they were all shouting that helicopters are coming. They're going to get them out by helicopter, they're going to get them off the roof. And from where I was, I couldn't see people looking out the windows now, but the other side, there could have been, you could hear people point and see people and shouting and pointing at the helicopter behind me and to my right, which was the initial fire point.
And just as for the sake of clarity, is your view that the helicopter was insufficiently close to affect how the fire behaved?
You assume that if it got closer, it wouldn't have helped the situation, but it stayed a distance. But in my mind, it gave false hope that they were going to be rescued from the building's roof.
turning to a different topic now, and that's the question of exposed hoses. And if I go to page 13 of your witness statement, the first substantive paragraph, you describe hoses being heavily exposed to debris and resorting to laying bits of debris and rubble over the new hoses to try and protect them. Does the LFB have measures, equipment that are designed to protect hoses so that you don't have to rely on putting rubble, etc., over the top of the machine?
We have
media.
We had one, we tried, but we had hose ramps which just protect the if vehicles are driving over hoses if they're exposed to road traffic. We carry nothing on the appliance, so it's more of a make do and protect. Once we laid the new hoses, I said just throw the debris on top and stop any more debris coming down from hitting the hoses direct. And that seemed to have a good outcome.
A couple of questions have arisen just in respect of FSG calls themselves, and I note what you say that you can't remember the detail, but do you recall being given any information regarding flat 175?
No.
Do you remember any information regarding flat 142?
No.
The final questions for you, Mr. Moore, I'd like to ask relate to your early assessment of the seriousness of the situation. Now, given your assessment that we discussed earlier, would you agree that there would have been difficulty getting people down from the higher floors?
Yes.
Now, did you make that observation to anyone, whether to a senior officer or to anyone at the bridgehead when you handed over the FSG slips?
I think that had already been assumed by people that were in the building because of the severity of the smoke travel.
What would there have been a better system to one that prioritised FSG calls on lower to higher floors that could have been used on the night, do you think?
In my opinion, my own personal opinion, the crews were having extreme difficulties and they tried their best, but to get to the higher floors was becoming more and more difficult due to smoke travel, the heat. So, no, I think we tried to rescue, and we did as many people as we could. And I think going to the lower floors, or not, when you say lower floors, I'm talking like 9, 10 upwards, that was easier to, not easier, it had been more beneficial to rescue those people rather than go past those people and then risk coming down and those people would not be there no more.
If you were handing the FSG slips over at the bridgehead, did you assume that the control room were telling residents that they were being told they were going to be rescued?
Sorry, could you repeat?
What assumptions were you making about what was being told by the control room to callers? Were you assuming those callers were told that they were going to be rescued?
I would assume that the control officer's job is to reassure people and tell them help was on the way, and it was on the way. We were doing our best, and we did more than our best.
What would have been the advantages and disadvantages of telling those who are on the higher floors simply to get out?
In hindsight, there'd have been, I think, a lot more casualties.
And why do you think
The
that?
stairs would have become, people would have been overcome with smoke much more quickly, and that would have, there was one stairwell, it would have blocked the stairwell, and it would have made rescues more difficult.
Ms Moore, thank you very much for your help today. Those are all the questions I have. Sir, might I ask for a brief break for 5 minutes just to see if there are any other matters which arise, and then...
Yes, well, it seemed to me that we'd reached the point where we might have a slightly more generous break, unless you tell me we can't afford the time.
So we've got a number of witnesses to crack through, and if we could have a 5-minute break, or say a 10-minute break...
Well, I think we should say 10 minutes. I think everybody would like that.
I'm grateful.
And I don't think that'll disrupt things too much.
Not too much. Thank you.
Mr. Moore, thank you very much. It's just possible that maybe some more questions for you. We're going to have a 10-minute break in any event now, so perhaps you'd hang on to see whether we need to ask you back.
Yes.
But if we don't, I'd like to say thank you very much on my own behalf for your coming to give us your evidence. It's always very helpful.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. We'd like to go with the usher now, please. Right, well, we'll break for 10 minutes until 20 to 12, please.
Thanks.
Okay. Yes, Mr. King.
So thank you for that. I have no further questions. There are no further questions for Mr. Alan Moore, and so may I ask him to be released?
Yes, of course. Thank you.
So with that, might I now call Firefighter Gary Moore?
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. Repeat the words for me. I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
that
the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moore. Now do sit down and make yourself comfortable.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Morning.
First of all, thank you very much for coming along to give evidence today. It's much appreciated. Would you please confirm your name for the record?
It's Gary Moore.
Thank you. And hopefully in front of you, you've got a blue folder which is open, and hopefully open at your statement that you provided to the police dated the 2nd of November 2017.
This one's Alan's. This is not mine.
That's not
Do you
your...
want to move further on in the file?
Okay.
Try the
Sorry.
next section of the file.
I don't know whether your name is written on a tab at the side.
Keep going.
Don't worry, Mr. Moore. Help is on its way.
It's up on the screen here.
Well, I was
so-
going to say, you might find it more convenient to use what's shown on the screen because it can be blown up
Yeah.
to make it easier to read.
Okay.
So should we work on that?
Yeah, that's fine.
All right,
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
And you confirm that's your statement?
Yes.
Yeah. And have you read it recently?
Yes.
And are the contents true?
Other than a few typos, but yeah,
And are you content for the statement to stand as your evidence in the inquiry?
I am.
Thank you. Now, if at any time you want a break, just shout. There's not a problem with that. If at any time my questions are unclear, please say so, and I'll try and rephrase them. The fault's mine, not yours.
Okay.
Now, what I'd like to do today is focus on your role in the operation of the BA main control arrangements and the issues arising from that. Now, first of all, may I ask some basic questions just to establish some background? First of all, it's right that you were a firefighter employed by the LFB before retiring in November 2017.
Yes.
And how long had you been a firefighter for?
30 years.
And at the time of the fire, you were based at Park Royal, is that right?
That's correct.
And you held the rank of firefighter at that time?
Yes.
And on the night you were assigned to Red Watch,
Yes.
and you were the driver of Golf 291, a standard fire appliance.
Yes.
And your crew consisted of temporary watch manager Philip Turksey, firefighters Power, Grant and Worley. Is that
Yes.
right?
That's correct.
It's always difficult with timings, but does it sound right that you were mobilised at 0130 and arrived at GT at Grenfell Tower at 0149? Does that sound about right?
Sounds about right, yeah.
Now, the first topic I'd like to discuss with you is your first contact with Station Manager Kipling. And if I might ask you to look at page 3 of your witness statement, and through the wonders of technology, this will be amplified for you, Mr. Moore. And it's the second substantive paragraph on that page. You say this: as soon as I was in kit, I began to make my way towards the scene and was met by Station Manager Kipling at one of the commanding units. He immediately asked me for help. He told me that he needed help with setting up BA main control. This would normally be run off one of the command units. He tasked me with grabbing 2 colleagues to assist, to go to the bridgehead to gather information on how many BA units we had, how many were in the building, how many were involved in the incident, how many persons available to commit, who in control, etc. Now, first of all, Mr. Moore, can you remember now how soon after arriving you were grabbed by Station Manager Kipling?
I pulled up with the appliance. The rest of the crew went off. Obviously, as I was driving, I didn't have my fire kit on, so I put my fire kit on. So within about 5 minutes of arriving, I was walking down the road and was met by Station Manager Kipling.
So about 5 to 2 or thereabouts?
Yeah.
Thank you. And had you at that stage been expressly directed to report to the command unit to report?
No, but normally you would. Normally the OIC of the machine would, you'd pull up, he would go and hand in a nominal roll board, and then come back and give you your jobs or your task or whatever they want to do. Obviously, that night it was a bit... The machine just starburst. We pulled up and everyone was off and running.
Okay. Staying on page 3, looking at the final paragraph, you there describe going to the tower with Firefighter Barker, and you stayed in the foyer whilst Firefighter Barker went to the bridgehead. Now, on Firefighter Barker's return, did you ask him what he'd been told at the bridgehead regarding the information sought by Mr. Kipling?
Yes, he'd written it all down.
Okay. And did you discuss the information he'd been provided with?
I didn't discuss it with him. He just gave it to me, and we went back and found Station Manager Kipling.
And what did he do with... What had he written it down on? Was it a pad? Was it a single piece of paper? What?
I don't know. One of those two things, yeah.
Okay. And did Firefighter Barker refer to any requests for EDBA wearers coming from those in charge at the bridgehead?
No.
Did you discuss with him on the way back from the bridgehead the need for EDBA?
No.
No. Given you could see the tower from outside, did the need for EDBA cross your mind as a sort of possibility that might be needed in due course?
I would have thought, yes, it did, because of the size of the building and obviously the condition that it was in at the time, and obviously going upstairs wearing BA will seriously knock down your set if you're wearing standard breathing apparatus. Did
you raise that point with Station Manager Kipling on your return from the tower?
I may have done, I'm not sure, I can't remember.
Can you remember whether Firefighter Barker raised it with Mr. Kipling in your hearing?
I don't know.
Okay. From your witness statement, it appears that that was your first and only time inside the tower, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, the next topic I'd like to discuss is the setting up of the BA main control. Now, first, when you left the tower, you found that Station Manager Kipling had set up the main control on the grass outside the sports centre, is that right?
Initially, we was in a command unit. When I first met him, he took me to a command unit and we was going to set it up in there. So then he asked me to go and find 2 colleagues to help, which I did. And when I come back, he'd gone. So then it was a task of trying to find out where he'd gone to. And then I found him on the grass area outside the sports centre.
And if, Paul, you could turn up Met document 000-16854, and if you could magnify the area in the immediate vicinity of the tower, you'll see, Mr. Moore, there's this big screen above your head. Are you able to identify for us where you found Station Manager Kipling setting up the BA main control?
Is there anywhere on there where the sports centre is? Or the leisure centre? Because it was in front of that on the grass area, wherever that is.
If you could zoom out slightly, it's probably going to be more helpful. You'll see Kensington Leisure Centre there on the right-hand side.
Yes. You see the word east, or the east of the tower?
Yep.
It was on the grassy area there.
Thank you. Now, turning to page 4 of your witness statement, the third substantive paragraph, you say there that you had never previously been responsible for operation of the main control, and this wasn't a job usually done by a firefighter.
Not usually, no.
Why isn't it a role usually carried out by a firefighter?
It's normally done by the command unit staff, because obviously it's a normal incident. They've obviously got a lot more time to do it and a lot more resources to do it, but not that night.
And so was your understanding that the more senior officers who would usually do the task were otherwise engaged?
Yeah, it wouldn't have been normally a senior officer, but just a command unit staff would do it.
Had you received any training at any stage as to how to carry out this role?
It was about 30 years ago.
Okay. Did you remember that training, I suppose, is the question?
Well, yeah, yes and no.
Okay.
Some of it was quite self-explanatory. It's just filling the boxes.
Now, you say that Station Manager Kipling had obtained some resource boards. In your witness statement, when you refer to control boards, are these the same things as the resource boards?
Yeah.
And the information you first wrote on the control boards, was this the information that Firefighter Barker had been provided with at the bridgehead?
Some of it was, yes, and some of it was what I'd gathered myself.
What information did you gather yourself?
Basically, how many wearers we had there in standard BA, how many wearers we had in EDBA, and how many spare cylinders we had of both, and how many times so far that the firefighters had worn into the tower, which we take into account.
So from the very outset, you had in mind EDBA wearers as being necessary?
I think they was already being used.
And at the outset, what information did you have as to whether, and if so, how many FRUs were on site at the time?
I didn't know how many FRUs were there.
Is there a means of finding out how many FRUs were on the scene?
I'd imagine there would have been, yeah.
Would you have contacted the command unit, for example?
I didn't have any direct contact with the command unit. Station Manager Kipling might have done and asked how much, because I know later on in the incident he did request more EDBA.
And are EDBA cylinders readily identifiable?
Yes,
How?
different colour.
And what is that colour?
They're orange.
And
Well, they've got an orange cover.
And SDBA are
Yellow.
Was Station Manager Loft involved at any stage in the setting up or operation of the BA control boards?
No.
Did you come across Station Manager Loft at any stage during the night? The next topic I'd like to discuss is the fine detail of your role on the evening, if that's all right. Now, Station Manager Kipling says that he deployed you to ascertain names, numbers of crew, and a rough plan of the tower. Does that sound about right to you?
Yes.
And how did you go about finding crews?
They were all out in front of me in various states of dress, sort of all over the grass.
They congregated on that grass frontage
Excuse me,
between the
yeah.
leisure centre and the tower?
Yeah.
Yeah. And had you divided them up into SDBA wearers or EDBA wearers?
No, they was just all scattered.
How do you go about ensuring that BA crews reported to you so that you knew what resources you had to deploy in
It was
response?
very difficult. They just wanted to get in.
Yeah.
Every single one of them was desperate to get into that tower. So it was quite hard keeping hold of them, keeping them in one place and keeping your resources together.
How did you manage the allocation of crews to calls for assistance from the bridgehead?
So the call would come through from the bridgehead to Dan Kipling. He would then give me, right, I need X amount of X, Y, and Z. I would go away and find them, bring them back. Dan would brief them, and then they would depart to the bridgehead.
And was that the same process you identified for locating EDBA crews?
Yeah, exactly the same.
And did you try and corral EDBA crews separately from the others in the grass area in front of the tower?
No, because when they was obviously been committed and they come out again, you couldn't. You turn around and there would be some here, some there. It was just easy to let them get on. They had hard enough time as it is.
Okay. Did you find a rough plan of the tower to assist your operations?
I didn't know.
What did you use then?
I just basically drew a very with a China Golf pencil, just a tower, an entrance in where we was in relation to that.
And that was based simply on what you'd observed
Yes,
since your attendance at the
basically
scene?
what we see, yeah.
Okay. Did Firefighter Barker assist with any further detail that he'd elicited from the bridgehead?
Firefighter Barker and Firefighter Power, they were helping servicing BA sets. So when the crews come out from the tower, their sets would need servicing. They would go over to them where they would give them a fresh cylinder and anything else that they needed. So,
Were you required to give any form of briefing to the crews waiting to be deployed?
no.
Were you responsible for taking any form of debriefing from the crews once they've returned from any deployment within the tower?
No.
Mr. Kipling describes Station Manager Loft relaying information to him and Station Manager Saunders then running between the command unit and the point you were at. Were you also, as part of the process, taking notes of information that had been passed to Station Manager Kipling?
No.
Were you taking any notes of any purpose during the course of the night?
No, other than the ones only sort of getting BA numbers, getting wearers together. That's all I was recording, like resources.
Were you involved in providing any rescue briefings to BA crews at the entry control board point?
No.
Do you know who was?
No, I don't know.
The next topic I'd like to discuss with you is communication of BA requirements from the bridgehead to you. And at page 5 of your witness statement, the first line, you say, Station Manager Kipling was receiving requirement orders by phone and radio from the bridgehead, saying how many wearers they needed, and would then ask me to get the numbers of firefighters required together and ready to go and advise when they were ready to deploy. Was there a particular individual tasked with radioing, phoning Station Manager Kipling at the bridgehead that you're aware of?
I don't know.
Okay. Is it usual to use mobile phones as opposed to handheld radios in circumstances such as this?
Not normally, but say the communications was playing up that night.
What are the advantages of using a mobile phone as opposed to the
I
handheld
suppose
radio?
there must be a stronger signal, better signal.
Have you ever, based on your experience, what use is made of mobile phones within fighting fires in high-rise towers, for example, or situations where the radio reception isn't
Well,
ideal?
with policy, we're not supposed to carry them as firefighters. Senior managers are allowed their phones, but under policy, we're not supposed to carry mobile phones. People do.
Yeah. Okay. Can you remember what time the bridgehead first asked for EDBA to be obtained? Had it been done before or after you were tasked with your role at the main control centre?
I don't know.
Can you remember whether Station Manager Kipling suggested the bridgehead whether EDBA was necessary?
I'd imagine he got information back from the bridgehead, them requesting EDBA.
Thereafter?
Yeah, thereafter, yeah.
Staying at page 5 of your witness statement, the first paragraph, 4 lines from the top, you say that Station Manager Kipling went through 2 radios and mobile phone batteries. I've never known anything like it. My radio ran out during my deployment, but I just continued on working off word of mouth from that point to receive information of what was happening and being directed by Station Manager Kipling. When you refer to word of mouth there, do you mean that firefighters were updating you face-to-face on BA requirements, firefighters coming from the bridgehead? What do you mean there?
No, I mean sort of Dan Kipling communicating with me. If he wasn't around, then he'll come back and see me rather than trying to get hold of me by radio, because neither of us are our radios are working.
And presumably Mr. Kipling was moving around
Yes.
the front area, so he wasn't in one fixed point
No,
during the
not all
course
the
of
time, no.
Okay. Did you receive any updates or orders from the command unit at any stage during the night regarding, say, the need for EDBA wearers more often?
No, we didn't. As far as I'm aware, we didn't have any contact with the command unit.
Okay. Certainly you
I didn't, no.
receive. Okay. Now, can I now turn to the question of the initial deployment of crews? Now, the first EDBA deployment was the Paddington FRU team, and they were deployed to go to the roof. Were you aware of that?
No.
Now, I think the second EDBA team was from Chelsea, and I'll just take you through some facts just so you understand the context. Golf 346 has been status 3 since 0136, but its members tallied in at 0244. Were you aware of the Chelsea team being on site?
I was later on in the incident. I don't know, at that time I was. They might have been at the bridgehead, I don't know.
Presumably, therefore, you were unaware that between arrival and then presenting themselves to you, they'd been put on other duties. Were you aware of that?
No.
Okay. Given the apparent lapse of time between 0136 and 0244, how did you ensure that EDBA crews were identified and deployed as efficiently and as swiftly as possible?
We're just like a resource point. So we would get, the bridgehead would ask for X amount of standard duration BA wearers, X amount of EDBA wearers. We would just deploy them to the bridgehead. It'd be down to the bridgehead on how they're deployed from that point on.
So there's no point of contact liaising with you and that point of contact identifying EDBA as they arrived to notify you of their arrival on the scene?
No, they wouldn't. No, they would just, everyone sort of congregated together. Because normally it's run from a control unit, so you'd all be outside of the control unit. But obviously this was slightly different.
Okay. Group Manager Mulholland said in evidence that he found EDBA 8 EBDA wearers not in use. He says simply standing there after his second trip into the tower. Did Mr. Mulholland take this point up with you or anyone within your earshot?
No.
Are you aware of any other instance where there were unused numbers of EDBA wearers?
No, not at all.
Can Could I now turn on to the question of the adequacy of SDBA in this circumstance? And at page 5 of your witness statement, in the third substantive paragraph, you say this: quite quickly it became apparent that standard BAs were just not enough. I think it was about 0230, 0245 that we stopped using them. The sets were running out too early. As soon as the firefighters were getting up the floors, they were having to come straight back down, unable to carry out any rescues or firefighting. We desperately needed EDBAs and were waiting for qualified area units and kits to arrive. Apologies for asking an obvious question first, but how did the insufficiency become apparent to you?
Because it's just say a crew was tasked to go to whatever floor. They just wasn't getting to that floor. They was getting so far, and time of whistle was telling them to turn around and come back out again. Although most were going past that and ignoring it. They still couldn't reach the floors because of the conditions and how far they had to travel.
And this is what they were telling you on their return from the tower?
Yeah.
Would or indeed should it have been obvious that SDBA wouldn't be sufficient given the tower had 24 floors and the nature and extent of the fire spread?
Yeah.
You say stopped using SDBAs at 0230 or thereabouts. Just to clarify, are you saying that from 0230 or thereabouts you solely deployed EDBA units?
I believe it did for a while, but then I think they carried on using it. But SDBA, but at what time that was, I don't know.
And so what was done with the SDBA crews then? Were they just rested?
Resting, yeah.
Okay. Were you deploying EDBAs only to those firefighters who'd been trained in their use?
Oh yeah, you've got to be trained in EDBA to use it, yeah.
We heard some evidence in July that the differences between SDBA and EDBA weren't so great.
It's not massive, but you have to do the course.
Okay. But you didn't deploy anyone who hadn't had the training is the key point?
No.
And did you ask whether...
There were people willing to do it.
That's what I was coming to. Given that people were volunteering, what did you do?
Put an EDBA set on. Yeah, not trained in it, yeah.
And so did you say, was it a rote pattern you asked each crew who wanted to be deployed, are you trained?
No, I wasn't
or how
asking
did you do
them
it?
that, no.
So how did you verify?
Oh, they have a sticker on the side of their firefighter's helmet to identify them as EDBA wearers.
One point which has arisen is the question, to the best of your knowledge, do EDBAs provide more protection against heat than SDBAs? Are you able to help us with that? Are you saying you don't know, or you're...
No, they don't. It's the same firefighting kit. Okay. It's just a different set.
Turning to the next question of redeployment of EDBA crews, at page 6 of your witness statement on the third substantive paragraph, you say that EDBA crews were going in 2 or 3 times. Are you able to summarise for us the risks that are caused from repeated redeployment?
Yes, obviously heat stress, massively.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And what are the problems that are caused from heat stress, just so for people who aren't aware of?
Yeah, you get in there, you don't know what you're doing, you lose all bearings, you can get yourself lost. So yeah, it's a big thing.
Did you see any evidence of that in terms of crews returning from the tower?
I didn't see any actual evidence of it, but there was crews there that have been working very, very hard. Extremely hard.
If I can now turn to the question of batteries, and do you recall a problem with the telemetry batteries being flat on the EDBA supplied cylinders?
Yes.
Yeah. Did this
sets, sorry, that is.
Sets, sorry.
Yeah, on the sets, yeah. We I don't know what time it was, but Dan Kipling ordered on some extra sets because there was qualified people there that could wear it, they just needed a set to wear. And when the sets arrived, the batteries were flat on the sets, but apparently that is how they should be.
You're not. You
apparently that's what Dan was telling me this morning.
And did the problem of the flat batteries cause any problem in terms of deployment?
Yes, it delayed because then we had to get some charged batteries.
And how much time did it take you to get the charged batteries?
About half an hour, 40 minutes maybe.
And what kit, apologies, this is another obvious question, so apologies, but what kit do you have that enables you to charge? Are they on the appliance? Or
normally
what?
Yeah, normally the set's on the appliance, so it's plugged in. So the minute you take it out, it's ready to go. but these were new, fresh sets that needed putting together. So you had to put the set together, put the battery in, put the cylinder on, put the cylinder cover on, and then you're ready to go. But obviously the batteries that they supplied was flat.
And when you came across the issue regarding the flat batteries, was that at the time where there'd been the order only to deploy EDBA crews, or was it a time?
I believe it was, yeah.
And so during that time, was the simple reality that no EDBA crews were deployed at all?
No, because we did have the ones there that were there already, where their sets were working fine. It was just the new sets that had turned up on the OSU.
In your view, therefore, did the problem with the flat batteries cause any delay in deployment of EDBA crews?
Yeah, it did, yeah.
Do you recall any similar problems with BA covers not being available on some cylinders?
Yes.
And
The sets turned up, the new sets that turned up on the OSU didn't have any covers.
And what's the consequence of that?
Basically, so they then, the crews that were deployed, that were inside the tower, when they came out, we then had to take their cylinder cover off and give it to the fresh crew or a different crew for them to be able to progress into the bridgehead.
And did that cause any delay?
Yeah.
And are you able to estimate for us now the sort of extent of the delay that caused?
Well, then you're only talking a couple of minutes each time they come out, but there's still a delay.
At page 8 of your witness statement, 3 lines from the bottom, you say there are only 16 units in the brigade that have the EDBA units, but only 10 were at the fire. How do you know that there were only 16 units in the brigade with EDBAs?
I think I've been told that. I was told that when I was making my statement.
Okay, it's not something you knew at the time.
I knew roughly how many there was, but I wouldn't have.
Okay. Again, staying on page 8, the third substantive paragraph, you say EDBA systems give extended breathing time and would have made a difference. Again, could you explain to us the precise nature of the difference you think would have been achieved by having wider availability of EDBA?
An EDBA set just lasts a lot longer than a standard duration set. So, obviously, giving you longer time to work in it.
I now want to turn to a separate topic, and that's the operational support unit. Now, just by way of background, Golf 25 Alpha, Ealing's operational support unit, arrived on scene at 01:42. Were you aware of the location of that OSU when it arrived at scene?
No.
Is it right that the OSU carries a variety of additional equipment, consumable resource packs, fuel, water, BA cylinders, etc.?
It does, yes.
Yeah. Did you know whether the OSU was carrying anything else on the night?
I don't know, no.
Would it have carried EDBA?
I'm not sure.
Did you have any contact with any OSU during the course of the night?
No.
The next topic I'd like to discuss with you, indeed the final one, is the question of stay put. And if I could ask you to turn to page 10 of your statement and the final line of the final paragraph. You say, I personally think that we would have got a lot more people out if we had said early on to get out. My first question is this, when would you have given that advice?
See, as far as policy goes, it's control that give the advice to change. And my sort of personal opinion of that, it should be the incident commander who makes that decision early doors. So whenever the incident commander feels that we should change this, but whether it made any difference or not, I don't know. Okay. It's hindsight. It's
and would you have, given your 30 years experience, would you have considered evacuation total or partial?
At the time,
so when?
Yeah, I suppose at the time I did. But now thinking back, now sort of been watching the inquiry and stuff like that, finding out there was only one staircase, it could have created a lot of problems. So I think it was damned if you do, damned if you don't.
And is the fact that there was only one staircase a piece of information you only learnt after the...
I did, yeah.
You referred to the fact that on the night you thought about evacuation.
Yes.
What was your precise thought on the night?
It just the way that the tower was behaving, the way the fire had gone up, is that these people need to get out. They need to get out now.
And when did you have that thought? Was it on turning up or later on in the
Pretty
evening?
much just, yeah, on turning up. So, yeah.
Did you raise any concerns regarding the application to stay put with any senior officer at any stage during the course of the evening?
No.
Mr. Moore, thank you very much for your help. If, sir, I could have possibility of 5 minutes to see if there are any further questions.
Yes.
Apologies for that, and then...
All right. Well, Mr. Moore, it sounds as though that could well be all the questions we need to ask you. But there's always a possibility when people check that there might be a few more. So we'll have a 5-minute break.
Okay.
And let you know whether we need to ask you to help us any further.
Okay.
That'd be all right.
Thank you.
If we don't, let me just say thank you very much for coming along to help us, and your evidence will be very helpful.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. You'd like to go with the usher, please? Do you happen to know whether the next witness is standing or sitting?
I don't. I'm afraid.
He's sitting.
He's sitting.
All right. Well, if I say 20 past, it's easier to work to a definite...
I'm grateful. Thanks, sir.
Right, well, I shall rise then until 20 past, and then we'll see whether we need Mr. Moore back or whether we can start another witness. All right, thank you. Yes, Mr. King. Now, I understand that there are no further questions from Mr. Moore,
That's right, so he can be released with
so
your
he can be
permission, sir.
released. And who's our next witness?
So the next witness I'll be calling is Firefighter Jason King.
Thank you.
I'm taking him slightly out of order for this reason, that this morning when Mr. Kipling attended, he referred to his contemporaneous notes, upon which he'd made his own manuscript supplemental notes.
Yes.
They hadn't been disclosed. Those notes don't, in our view, materially alter matters. But for the sake of completeness, I've asked that those notes to which Mr. Kipling has added his own manuscript notes should be disclosed to the CPs as soon as possible today, so they can have an opportunity to consider themselves and, if necessary, raise any further questions they may have arising out of that. And so that is the reason for the quick swap of witnesses.
Yeah.
So in those circumstances, I'm grateful to Mr. King.
Right, thank you.
And if I could call him.
Take the book in your raised hand and read the words for me. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much, Mr. King. Sit down and make yourself comfortable. I'm sorry we've decided we'd like to take you out of order, and I'm grateful to you for
Yeah, no
agreeing
problem.
to that.
Thank you. Would you please confirm your name for the record?
Yeah, it's Jason Mark King.
Thank you. Mr. King, you have the rare value of being a witness called before he was due to be programmed, and I'm very grateful for you coming down so swiftly, and also very grateful for the help you're going to give the inquiry. First of all, hopefully there's a blue file in front of you, and behind the first tab, hopefully, is your witness statement dated the 10th of November 2017. Is that right?
That's correct.
And then if you turn the next tab, hopefully you'll find your contemporaneous note.
That's correct.
And thereafter, turning to the next tabs, you'll find 6 further exhibits that you completed for the purposes of your statement. Is that right?
That's correct.
Have you read those documents recently?
Yes.
And you confirm the contents are true?
Answer yes.
And are you content for those documents to stand as your evidence to the inquiry?
I am.
Now, Mr. King, you'll be aware that we've heard evidence from Watch Manager Beale, and I don't intend to go over the matters we raised with him. And so really I'd like to focus on 3 things with you today. First of all, the operation of Soho's ALP. Secondly, your involvement with residents. And thirdly, your own entry into the tower later on in the night. Now, if any time you require a break, please shout. That's not a problem. If any question I ask you is unclear, please shout. That's my fault, and I'll rephrase it so it's clear.
Okay, thank you.
Now, first of all, may I establish just certain basics? How long have you been a firefighter?
For 8 years.
And have you always worked for the LFB as a firefighter?
Answer yes.
Yes. And in June 2017, you held the same rank as today, namely firefighter,
That's correct.
and that you were based at Soho,
That's right.
and that you've been trained to operate aerial appliances for 2 years.
That's correct.
And so by now you've acquired 3 years' experience in their operation.
Yes, that's correct.
We have your mobilisation time for the night as 01:31, on the road at 01:33, and from the LFB's GPS data arrival at 01:52. Does that sound right to you?
Yes, answer yes.
And am I right in thinking that you were driving the Soho's ALP on the night?
That's correct.
And in terms of the operation of an ALP, what are the duties of the driver?
Well, initially get to the correct place, the scene of operations, and then once at the scene of operations to pitch and deploy the aerial ladder in the most appropriate position.
Thank you. Now, I'd like to talk with you first of all about your arrival at the tower, and if I could ask you to turn to page 2 of your statement, and the second paragraph on that page, 5th line down, you say this.
Sorry, excuse me, Mr. King, you may find it helpful to look at the display on the screen, because it's possible to blow that up so it's easy to read.
Thank you, sir.
And there you say, as we made our way in via Lancaster Gate into a road called Silchester Road. It was actually more by luck than judgment, so we ended up being the only access point that we could have used for our appliance. I remember we arrived at a police cordon and they were able to point us in the right direction and help to remove a bollard to allow us access. Then we were sort of there by the leisure centre. First of all, could I ask Paul to bring up the map, which is at MET 000016854. Now, Silchester Road is marked on that map. Can you show us, first of all, where you brought the ALP in?
Yeah, you'll see Silchester Road at the top of the screen there.
Yep.
Over on the right-hand side of that screen where it says 8.7,
Yep.
I'm assuming metres, we came down past the Methodist church there. And then,
sorry.
in the very, sorry, no, not from there. Ignore that arrow. So in the very top right of the screen there's the Methodist church.
Yes.
Okay, so we came down that road and then turned left. There's a road just on the corner there, so we turned left, which is facing down.
Yep.
We drove through there, and then we came in alongside the academy there, went into where it says east.
So some way down that road.
That's correct.
And where were the bollards that you removed, or the bollard rather?
I believe where it says posts.
Okay. When you say this was the only access point you could have used, can you explain why you couldn't have accessed the tower from any of the other sides?
That's more in hindsight, I should say, but having had the benefit of hindsight, I think you'll find that Grenfell Walk, the road at the bottom there, was lined up with normal pumping appliances, and Paddington's turntable ladder was blocking access on one side because it was already sited, and there was no access to the other two sides of the building via roadway, so that was pretty much the only place we were left with.
The first topic really I'd like to discuss with you is the setting up of the ALP itself. And on page 3 of your witness statement, looking at the first substantive paragraph, you say that you parked and crew manager Frost went to book in with the CU whilst you looked for somewhere to pitch the aerial. Do you remember which command unit he went to?
I'm afraid I didn't see which command unit he went to.
Paddington's aerial Alpha 213 was already parked up, is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. And you indicate where Alpha 213 was parked on your exhibited map, which is at MET 000015802. And Paul, I'd be grateful if you could bring that up if possible. And is it right that Alpha 213 was parked on the east side?
Yes, I believe so.
And I think, is it some 3 metres from the tower itself?
Answer yes.
Thank you. Turning back to page 3 of your witness statement, the second substantive paragraph, 4 lines down, you say we had no other option other than to pitch on the grass. Again, can you explain for us why that was your only option at the time?
Yeah, because having, so whilst temporary crew manager Frost was dropping our nominal roll board to the command unit, it's my job then to decide, well, not decide, but have a look around the building to see where the best pitch was. Mm-hmm. Normally we'd hope to pitch on the corner of a building so that we could access 2 different sides to it. On this occasion, around Grenfell Tower, there was a playground running round 2 sides of it with a 6-foot metal fence, which stopped access. It stopped us being able to get close to the tower. There was a walkway with which Paddington's aerial was already in use, and so the only other side that was left was where the Kensington Academy was. So the actual side that we were left with, even though that was behind 3 trees, was on the unmade ground, on the grass, on the east side of the building.
And what are the risks and problems that flow from setting up on grass for the ALP?
Well, we're taught and trained not to set up on unmade ground purely because of the weight of the jacks and of the entire appliance. With any unmade ground, also with the risk of water softening the ground. Obviously, I suspect that's probably why the main reason is that you shouldn't pitch on unmade ground.
And how close would you say you need to be in a building in order to achieve optimal height?
Sorry,
On the
could you
ladder.
rephrase that question for me? Sorry.
Yeah, of course. How close to a building do you have to get in order to get the highest reach of the ladder?
Well, the ladder can reach almost directly above the turntable below it, but it does project about 24 metres outwardly.
And if you're able to achieve optimal height, how high could you reach with the monitor, assuming you also had optimal water pressure?
So with optimal pressure and given the maximum amount of literage through the ground monitor, we'd expect about 75 metres projection.
And I think in your witness statement you say that you thought you were about 7 metres from the tower. Does that remain your estimate?
Yes.
Can I ask you to, Paul, would you mind bringing up LFB 60189, which should be the LFB policy 822 on operational use of appliances? First of all, are you familiar with this policy?
Answer yes.
Yeah. And if, Paul, could I ask you to turn to paragraph 4.19 at page 6? And if I could just let you read para 419 to yourself, Mr. King.
Yeah, I've read that.
On the night, were you able to carry out a risk assessment before operating the ALP?
Answer yes.
And what did that risk assessment involve?
Well, within the risk assessment, what we would have probably normally done is set up and ensure that it was a fully functioning aerial ladder platform, make sure we had enough water to get the machine working properly. As it happened, due to the issues that we had on the night, it never quite came to us needing to implement that safe system of work and that dynamic risk assessment. But throughout the process of setting the machine up, we would have been constantly dynamic risk assessing the situation.
And would you agree with the statement that aerial appliances would not normally be used for external firefighting in high-rise buildings until it's been confirmed that there's no longer any life risk in the building?
Yes, that's correct.
And to ask, I'm afraid, an obvious question, why is that so?
Yeah, no, essentially what happens when you put water onto an external, well, essentially when you use the, any aerial appliance, but the aerial ladder platform on that night, you create a water curtain which essentially could push the products of combustion through a building and therefore affect areas within that building that weren't previously affected.
And was that a consideration that you had regard to before starting to operate the ALP on the night?
Answer yes.
And how do you assess whether there is any risk to life within the building on the aspect of the building you intend to direct the water jet at?
Answer yes.
But where do you get your information from to ensure that whether there's anyone within the flats behind the exterior you're trying to aim the jet at?
Well, so given the vantage point that we had, we could very obviously see that there were persons involved, and that if we were to put water in there, then we would need to make sure everyone was aware that we were about to do so. Okay. That's not to say as well that we can't use the ALP as a covering jet. So we can apply water without directly affecting people, but that will be done on the instruction and after confirming with the incident commander.
How long did it take you after arriving at the scene to secure the water supply, set up the ALP and start to operate it?
Approximately 7 minutes.
Once you'd connected the hose in the cage to water, you set out at page 4 of your witness statement, and it's the 13th line from the top. You described crew manager Frost getting into the cage. You don't necessarily need to go to it unless you want to. In your contemporaneous note, you also say that firefighter Alan Syme was also in the cage with him. Is that right?
Answer yes.
Okay. And what was firefighter Syme doing in the cage?
At the time, sometimes it's just the cage can hold up to 4 people, so I believe he got in there just to assist temporary crew manager Frost.
Mm-hmm. Can you explain how far up the tower the cage had reached when you became aware that there was a problem with water pressure?
So we tested the water at the bottom, and it seemed to be of sufficient pressure in order to lift him. It was pretty much a gradual assessment that as the higher the cage went up, the less the water pressure was there. So it was almost like a continual process.
Did you go up sufficiently high so there was no water at all? Did it get that severe, the problem?
Answer yes.
At what height, by reference to floor or meters, did it get so that no water was coming out at all?
I would say approximately 15 metres.
You say at paragraph 5 of your statement, and we don't necessarily need to go to it, that the aerial can take up to 2,400 litres at 11.5 bars of pressure, but that you were getting about 381 litres. What would you say is the flow required to reach the optimal height of water supply? So that sounds like an exam question.
Yeah, no, sorry, can you rephrase it for me? I'll do my best.
Yeah. What flow is required to get to the optimal height? What pressure do you need?
So if you have the optimum litres per minute going through the ground monitor, then at the base you need 11.5 bar, and at the top of the 32-metre ladder it'd be 5.8 bar pressure.
Okay. And what flow of water would you get at the 5.8 bar point?
So that's
what flow of water?
Yeah, to say the 2,450 litres per minute.
Thank you. Watch Manager Beale in his statement says that your area wasn't close enough to that required pressure level for the water to reach the building. Is that consistent with your recollection?
Answer yes.
Do you recall who was operating Paddington's turntable ladder?
Yes, I do.
Who was it?
Firefighter Chris Reynolds and crew manager Daniel Harriman.
Okay. And did you speak to either of them about water pressure problems?
Only later on in the incident when I was wearing breathing apparatus inside the tower and I saw Firefighter Reynolds and we had a brief discussion about that.
Okay. Did you discuss any water pressure problems with Raymond Keane? Did you know him at Paddington?
I do know Firefighter Keane, and to the best of my knowledge, no.
Okay. Did you ask which hydrant that the Paddington's turntable ladder had been attached to?
Answer no.
No. Okay. Turning at page 4 of your witness statement, the last paragraph, fifth line down, you say that the ladder was stuck in the slower mode out of the two available speeds. Was this the case as soon as crew manager Frost had started to operate the ladder?
As far as I'm aware, yes.
Was this a problem that you'd come across before with this particular ALP?
I wouldn't be able to specify that it was this specific ALP, but in previous aerial ladder platforms that I've used, this has become an issue.
Okay. At what point did you realise that you were unable to communicate with crew manager Frost via the inbuilt comms system?
Very early on in its deployment. So as soon as he got in the cage and started to move up, we normally do a little comms check before he heads up, and he wasn't responding at that point.
Okay. What's the workaround that you devised to get around the fact the inbuilt comm system wasn't working?
So normally we would revert to the fireground radios, but as you can imagine, the fireground radios were quite busy, so we just reverted to shouting at one another.
Okay. Did you have a loud hail or anything like that to magnify?
I could have accessed one, but didn't need one.
Okay. Was the problem with the comm system something you'd come across previously?
Answer no.
Turning back to page 5 of your witness statement, eight lines down, you explain the problems with water pressure to Watch Manager Beale, and that he gave you a note to take to the command unit. Is that right?
That's correct.
Which command unit did you take this to? Was it CU8 on Bowmore Road?
To be honest, I don't recollect, but it was the one that was nearest the pump that Firefighter Keane was pump operating on, I believe.
Who did you speak to when you got there?
For want of a better description, a white helmet, but I don't know.
Okay. Can you remember, what did you say to him? Or her?
I think I was one of two notes that I physically took to the command unit that night. So, depending on which note you're referring to.
Well, the first one.
Regarding the water pressure.
Yeah.
I don't know who I spoke to, but I spoke to somebody on there.
Male, female?
I believe male.
Okay. What response did you get from the white helmet?
We had several discussions with several different people at the time, because obviously the lack of water pressure was becoming an issue. So I think, given my sort of vague recollection, I think that we were told that a water officer would be over to our sector soon and that we would be able to discuss that further with them.
Were you given any form of proactive advice as to workarounds that could be tried in order to increase water pressure?
No, we to be honest, we had already exhausted all practical advice that collectively we could have hoped to achieve, and now we were relying really on a better water pressure coming from an external agency or the redirection of other water supplies.
And flowing on from that answer, I think Watch Manager Beale in his evidence said that you tried to find an alternative hydrant, and he thought the one you found was on Verity Close. Does that accord with your memory?
Answer yes. It's not a normal practice that if one particular hydrant isn't being sufficient enough, then we'll try and find one a bit more of a distance away in the hope that it's not on the same main.
Was that before or after Mr. Frost went in the cage? Can you remember?
That would have been after, because at the ground level we had a reasonable water supply.
Okay. Can now deal with the question of setting up the hose reel on the cage. Again, page 5 of your witness statement in the first big paragraph, 9 lines from the bottom, you described the solution you came up with, which was, to summarise, to fix Alpha 241's high-pressure hose reel onto the ALP's cage and to operate it remotely from the bottom of the ladder. I know it's difficult. Can you remember what time in the evening you came up with this device?
I'm afraid I don't know.
Okay. And can you remember how long after you'd first tried to operate the aerial in the normal manner you successfully achieved this workaround?
It would be an estimate, but I would say approximately half an hour after we realised that the normal ground monitor wasn't going to work.
You say using your improvised system, the aerial could reach 10 floors up the building. In your contemporaneous note, you say that you're able to control the fire from below the 9th floor. Which one of those recollections do you think is more accurate?
As in between the 9th or the 10th? Well, originally it was the 9th, and then through further adjustment of our new process, we added the ceiling hook to it, which gave us approximately another 1.5 meters, 2 metres of throw, which probably took it up to the 10th.
You refer there to throw. Can you explain what that is?
It's just the projection of water from the hose reel branch onto the building.
Okay. And was the 10th floor the highest extent of the throw you thought you could achieve on the night?
It was I would say we possibly got to the 11th at one point. I think I make note in my statement.
Can I ask Paul to put up on the screen an extract from Dr. Lane's report, and it's BLAR, I think 802, at page 63. And it's figures 5.67 and 5.70. Now, you said in your witness statement that you can see the two sides that you managed to apply water to using the high-pressure hose. It may assist if you look at the very big screen above your head. Can you indicate which parts of the tower they are on the photos?
So I think that may be more of a collective we. I think if you look at Paddington's turntable ladder, I wouldn't want to comment on what exactly they hit, but they look like on the left-hand side of the building on this bottom left-hand corner.
So looking at figure 5.68, can you identify for us, just on this photograph, if you need to stand up and just point, where's the turntable ladder?
I believe it's... do you want me to point?
Yes, do stand up and just point, it's probably easier.
So I believe their turntable ladder's about here.
So just under the legend which says flat 16.
Sorry, to the left-hand side, so
Sorry.
here, whereas our ALP was probably here.
Okay.
So we were able to put water on this side.
Now, going back to your statement, page 5, and it's again the first long paragraph, 4 lines from the bottom. You say that you remained in position for the next 2 or 3 hours, and that during this time you would ask anyone in command who walked by to get you more water pressure so that you could use your bigger hose. Did any of the people you spoke to get back to you? solutions to your problem?
Not solutions, but answers to. So we spoke to several people about water supplies, included within them representatives from a water company, and they told us that that was the best we were going to be getting.
If I can stop you there, just dealing with the LFB officers,
Yeah.
you asked, can you remember which officers came back to you to give you a response?
I can't remember the specifics, but I know we spoke to senior officers with water officer tabards, operations commanders, tabards, pretty much anyone that would be able to assist us with getting more water on that area.
And did they give the same advice, or did different officers give different advice as to what the possible solutions could be or the position was?
There was no further advice.
Okay. And you referred to advice from the water company, which was, this was as good as it was going to get, in summary, is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
Did you try and get back to the command unit to raise your concerns regarding water pressure again after your first visit?
So after our first visit, we were told that a water officer would come and see us. Having spoken to that water officer, that was the answer we got, so I felt no need to go back to the command unit.
As you were applying water to the building, were you in communication with the incident commander or with the bridgehead to check whether there were crews inside the areas that you were focusing on?
Only via my sector commander. So I would report to my sector commander, who would pass that on to the incident commander.
And who was your sector commander you were dealing with?
Watch Manager Beale.
Generally, how effective do you feel the system was that you adopted for controlling the fire on the part of the building you were focused on?
I think, given the limited water supplies, it was as effective as we could have hoped for.
One point that's been raised, a question that's arisen is, do you think that operating the ALP in the way you did, with the reduced water pressure, was that the most effective use of that resource?
Yes, I do believe it was, because given the amount of litres per minute we were getting out of the hydrant and through the fire engine, that was the best application of the water onto the building.
I'd now like to turn on to a different topic, and that's your involvement with residents within the tower. And again, going back to page 5 of your witness statement and the bottom paragraph, you described there looking up at the tower as you were operating the aerial and seeing several people in flats waving their mobile phones. Did you pass on information regarding the location of those residents to the incident commander?
Again, via the sector commander, yes.
Okay. Did you pass any information directly to the bridgehead?
Answer no.
Did you have any dealings during the course of the night with the bridgehead whilst you were operating the ALP?
Answer no.
Okay. You also describe, again turning over the page to page 6 of your witness statement, the first substantive paragraph, using water to protect a resident that you could see at his window on the 11th floor. And you explained that in order to gain the extra height, you used a ceiling hook as an extension. You referred to it in an answer earlier on. Starting with basics, what's a ceiling hook?
It's a piece of equipment that all frontline fire engines carry, or pumping appliances carry. It's essentially just a long metal pole with a slight right angle piece of metal on the end, right at the end of it, which we use normally for pulling down ceilings. So I believe it was made primarily to force through, rotate through 90 degrees, and then pull a ceiling down.
Can you explain for us briefly what you did in order to enable you to reach up to the 11th floor using the ceiling hook?
So my colleagues lashed off using their personal lines. They physically tied the ceiling hook to the cage of the aerial, and then tied the hose reel branch onto the end of the ceiling hook, just purely to gain the advantage of the extra meterage of the ceiling hook.
Okay. And what steps did you take before applying water around the man on the 11th floor to ensure that he wouldn't be injured by the application of water?
I believe that was referred to the incident commander via the sector commander.
Okay. So you had no direct dealings with the incident commander?
Answer no.
No. Okay. The penultimate topic I'd like to deal with you is your entry into the tower itself. if I could ask you to turn to page 7 of your witness statement, and there at the first line, you describe reporting to the BA holding area with crew manager Frost, having heard calls on your radio for BA wearers. And you say that you did this 3 times before you were allowed in because they were wanting only to commit EDBA wearers. Is that a fair summary?
Yes.
The first 2 times, is it right that you went to the BA holding area by the leisure centre?
That would be correct.
And do you remember what time this was? Apologies, it's a difficult question, I know, but doing the best you can.
No, I don't remember what time.
And the third and final time was you went to a holding area, and that was near the entrance to the tower itself, is that right?
Yeah, on the third time, we bypassed the main holding area and made our way direct to the secondary staging point, which was near the base of the tower underneath the walkway.
Put bluntly, you avoided the main holding area and went to the entrance to enhance your prospects of getting in, is that fair?
That's fair.
Okay. Again, just for the sake of completeness, can you remember now what time it was you gained entrance to the tower from the more direct holding area?
No, I don't.
Okay. You say it was crew manager America called you in. Do you know if by this point the policy of only committing EDBA wearers had been stopped? Were you aware of that?
I assume it must have been because I was wearing SDBA and I was surrounded by SDBA wearers.
Okay. Turning at page 7 of your witness statement again, 13 lines down, you describe entering the lobby on the ground floor and you say that you waited there quite a while. First of all, do you know what time it was, again, when you entered the lobby? Apologies for asking the question, but...
No, fortunately I don't have a record. The only thing I'd say is it was daylight.
Okay. Can you remember now how long you were waiting there?
Well, so in total, I think we were held at 3 different staging points before it was our turn to go in. So it would have been a vague time, but I don't actually have a time to give you.
Do you know who tasked you with replacing burst hoses from the LPP?
No.
Okay. And was the initial task with or without breathing apparatus?
To replace the burst hose without.
As I understand it, next you were then sent up to the bridgehead, and it was then on the 5th floor, is that right?
To the best of my recollection, yes.
And if I could ask you to turn to the top of page 8 of your statement, and you say there that your crew was tasked with searching floors 6, 7, 8 and 9. We don't need to go to it unless you want to. Your contemporaneous note, page 2, about 10 lines from the bottom, states that you're tasked with firefighting as well as searching. Looking back now, what's the more accurate summary of the tasks you were ordered to complete?
Well, I think a more accurate summary would be to just confirm some of the information that... So we arrived at the bridgehead, and whilst we got briefed, it was just after the handover to a new station manager. And so I think the station manager just wanted to confirm the information that he'd received. And so he used the first 2 crews that he had to just double check what he'd already been told. Yeah. So we were told to firefight, but essentially double check that all rooms on the floors we were briefed had been searched.
Okay. And was this station manager Kaz Manley who gave you the briefing?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Apologies for jumping ahead in your witness statement. Going ahead to page 9, the second line, you say that something had gone very wrong for there to be no organised search procedures and no internal firefighting on the 6th to 8th floors at that stage in the incident. Can you explain for us what kind of system you would have expected to be in place at this stage?
Yeah, with hindsight, I think that I would rather have reworded that statement. I think that what we were actually doing is confirming, as I just said, for the benefit of Station Manager Kaz Manley, that in fact there had been organised search procedures, but the fact that the bridgehead had been moved several times and that there was various information on different places within the incident, including the forward information boards, I just think that we were really double checking that the information that he had been given was correct. And there were so many crews there, it was a pretty reasonable thing to do to just use those 2 crews just to give him clarity.
And when you were committed, is it right that you were committed with firefighters Reynolds and crew managers Piercy and Harriman? Does that sound right?
In 2 separate crews of 2. So I was committed with crew manager Piercy and crew manager Harriman and
Firefighter Reynolds were committed separately.
Okay. Looking at the looking at the first paragraph on page 8, you described getting to the 7th floor, and if I may summarise your evidence, you see pockets of fire that you needed water to extinguish. There's a hose on the floor next to the dry riser, but no branch. Can you explain how you were able to operate the hose without a branch to put the fire out?
Yeah, again, not within policy, but they were fairly small pockets of fire, so we just held the female couplings at the end of the hose and just turned the water on from the riser main and just pretty much just painted it out.
Okay. Excuse me, you say that you radioed down for a branch but none was available. Does that mean that you were able to make contact with the bridgehead for them to tell you that no branch was available?
To the best of my recollection, I don't think I contacted the bridgehead at that point, but I tried to, didn't get a response, and then continued.
Looking at page 9 of your witness statement, the top second paragraph, you describe seeing Surrey's taller aerial ladder as you left the tower. Can you remember now what side of the tower the Surrey ladder was on?
Yeah, they pitched directly adjacent to us.
Was it applying water at that point?
They were using the same extinguishing media as us in the high pressure hose reel from Mercedes Mark III.
Were you able to make an assessment of how effective the application of water from the Surrey ladder was at that stage?
I think at that time, to be honest, I was more pleased that they hadn't found a different position to pitch or to a different system with which to apply water. That sounds selfish, but it was more of a confirmation that where we'd pitched and what we'd used was the best available.
Had you thought earlier on in the evening whether it was possible to get a ladder of the extent of the Surrey ladder at all?
Answer no. To my knowledge, I didn't know that if there was a taller ladder in Surrey.
Okay. There's one final question. We don't need to go to it, but at page 8 in the second paragraph, you mention a body on the stairs. Did you move that body at all?
No, I did not.
Thank you. Mr. King, I have no further questions for you. So given the time we're at, I don't know whether Mr. King would prefer to have lunch whilst under oath or not under oath.
I suspect Mr. King would like to finish giving his evidence as soon as possible, wouldn't you?
That would be
Yeah, well,
preferable. So.
Do you think there might be some more questions? Yeah, well, I'll rise for a couple of minutes.
Thank you, sir.
People can then consider whether there are any further questions for you.
Thank you, sir.
And then we'll try and get you through before we break for lunch. How's that?
Thank you very much.
All right. Would you like to go with the usher now, then, please?
Thanks.
Well, rather than say precisely when I'll come back, I'll invite you to send the usher to fetch me as soon as you're ready. Is that all right? Thank you.
So thank you. Just some brief supplemental questions, which will
Yes.
take no longer than 2 or 3 minutes.
That's all right, yes. I think there may be a couple more questions, Mr. King.
Mr. King, thank you for your patience. First of all, can you remember what the reach was of the Surrey ladder by reference to floors or meters?
I think in hindsight, I think it had an extra 10 metres, but I'm not sure of that, I'm afraid.
Final set of questions dealing with gas. You'd heard that the gas had been turned off. Who told you that, and can you remember when?
I don't think I made reference to being told that.
You say it's absolutely convinced that a number of hours into the fire there was what looked like a self-propagating flame, clear yellow in colour, burning in the centre of the 8th floor. Why were you so convinced that?
It was more. It should have been blue, but I was concerned that after that amount of time, and by that point I think we'd been there about 10 hours, that there was still things. Sounds a bit morbid, but there were still things catching fire. And because normally you'd have expected it to have burnt out by then, and so the fact that there was still visible flames still keep coming out of that particular area of the building led me to believe that perhaps it was gas alight.
Okay, thank you. I've no further questions. Thank you,
That's
sir.
it? All right.
That's it.
Well, Mr. King, thank you very much indeed. I'm glad we've been able to finish your evidence before we break for lunch. We don't have any more questions for you. Thank you very much indeed for coming to give us your evidence and filling in your little part of the jigsaw. And we're very grateful.
Thank you very much.
And now you're free to go. Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Sir, just before you rise, earlier...
Sorry, you go with the usher, that's fine. Thank you.
Earlier I advised that Mr. Kipling's contemporaneous notes, the one he'd added
Yes.
his own notes to, had been disclosed. We have hard copies available should CPs wish to have those, and we can provide them now so they can review them over lunch.
My experience is that when people have to review things over lunch, they don't get lunch or they don't get the review done. Does anybody need more than the usual 1 hour for lunch?
If it says the notes aren't lengthy, and I suspect lunch will be sufficient for people to form a view, which is possibly unhelpful.
We will have to trust the indication of the person who's read them, but we will do our best, and thank you for asking. If there's a problem, we'll let you know.
All right, well, that's perfectly right. So I'll say 2:05 then, please.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you.